Chapter 1445. Even so, the Mongol army had to pay a huge price in order to obtain victory against the White Russian army. Furthermore, this method of fighting where both sides suffered heavy losses caused the Mongol cavalry to feel fear and headache. Now, Gray was saying that the Han army's firearms were far more powerful than the White Russian army's. Furthermore, from the looks of it, their firepower was not just 1 or 2 times greater. Bullets with a range of a few kilometers and muskets that could continuously take a person's life. If they really had these things, it would be normal for the Mongol army to lose. Erhi's expression kept changing. Gray knew that the other party had taken his words to heart. Striking while the iron was hot, he continued to speak. It's precisely because of the might of the Han army's firearms that this general was defeated in their hands. Shengjing's Sarai city was captured in less than a day. Now, the Han army has set their sights on New Sarai city. It's laughable that Mahama, who doesn't know the difference between them and the Han army, wants to fight to the death. However, they don't know that the final battle will happen, but they will definitely be the ones to die. The Han army will definitely win. No matter how many tribes come this time, they won't be a match for the Han army. They will just be increasing their casualties. Isn't this a little exaggerated? Erhi's tone carried a trace of doubt as he listened to this description that did not seem to be true. No, not only is this not exaggerated, it's not enough. There are some things that you will only know if you personally experience it. Gray sighed. At this moment, he was truly worried for the future of Mongolia. Faced with such powerful firearms, he could not see any possibility of the Mongol army winning. This final battle might end with the Mongol army suffering a great loss. If that was the case, would the Mongol army still have a future? If that's the case, we are indeed not a match for them. However, even if we can't win, we can still escape. He understood Gray. Although he was greedy, he was not a person who did not know how to lie. Thus, he chose to believe Gray. However, he did not think that surrendering to the Han army was the only way to survive. Escape? Where are you running to? I forgot to tell you that the Han army this time is different from the Han army in the past. Facing their enemies, not only will they not show any mercy, they will even build a city here to replace the ruler and become the new master of this place. At that time, any forces and tribes that oppose them will have to face a cruel blow. Rather than surrendering at that time and becoming a pariah, it is better to surrender to them now. At least they will still be loyal to them. They can even raise some conditions and enjoy a lot of benefits. Gray's words had completely shocked Erhi. In fact, Gray's words were even more shocking than Gray's words about how powerful the firearms were. In the land of Huaxia, there had been many wise monarchs and great figures. However, there were very few people who truly made the Mongols afraid, and none of them were afraid to the bone. The reason for this was that the Han people did not care about their territory and would often leave after winning a battle. This piece of land would eventually belong to them. Just based on this point alone, once the Mongols were strong, they would definitely set their sights on the Han. On the other hand, he wasn't afraid that the other party would do anything to him. This was also the biggest reason why the Mongols had been able to survive until today. If it wasn't for that, they would have been annihilated countless times already. But now, Gray had actually said that the Han people were going to build a city here and build an army here. Wasn't that equivalent to occupying their final resting place? If that was the case, how could they survive? Could it be that the heavens wanted them to die? His expression became extremely ugly. He finally understood why the prideful Gray would surrender to the Han people. Yes, when the Han people were not only strong, but they also wanted to occupy their territory and not leave, that kind of deterrence would truly make people feel fear from the depths of their bones. After being shocked for a long time, he finally opened his mouth and asked, "Our land is so barren. Other than the fur of animals, there is nothing else that can catch their eye. If they build a city here and station an army here, where will all the expenses come from? I don't think the Han people will be able to sustain this kind of loss-making business for long." The reason why the previous dynasties had only defeated the Mongols and not occupied their land was because this place was simply too barren. Apart from spending money and manpower, there were no benefits to occupying this place. But now, the Han army actually wanted to occupy this place for a long time. Did they not consider this point? No, we were all wrong. The Han people have already found a lot of iron or nearby. I heard that once those things are shipped out, they can be sold for a lot of money. Pitiful people like us who are ignorant. We actually did not know that we were guarding a treasure mountain. Now, it is all going to benefit the Han people. With this income, they can stay here and not leave. Gray shook his head. How could he not have thought of the same idea? But when he heard that the Han people had opened up the mountain to mine, this idea had completely disappeared. With a plop air, he fell back into his chair. This time, he finally understood that the Han army had thought of everything. This way, the nightmare of the Mongols was about to arrive. No, it could not be said that it was a nightmare. The Han people needed people to mine, right? This way, wouldn't it be an opportunity for them? If they lived a herding life, they could survive when the years were good, but it was not a long-term plan. If they could help the Han people mine and earn money, who would say that this was not a good thing? However, if they wanted to get a share of the profits, they had to make the Han people believe in them and leave a good impression on them. When he thought of this, he looked at Gray, there was no longer ridicule in his eyes, only admiration. It turned out that there were people who thought even further than him. Even so, it was time for him to make a choice. He did not immediately give an answer. He tried to bargain for a while. Gray understood his meaning and shook his head. Don't try to be smart. I am not a Han person. It is useless for you to talk to me. They will not talk to you either. If you want to fight for a future for yourself, you can only gamble. If you win, you can obtain benefits after helping the Han army. If you lose, don't think about it anymore. Of course, you can also choose to continue walking with Mahama and walk towards destruction together. As soon as he said this, he shut his mouth. Although this answer made him unhappy, he also knew that the situation was stronger than the person. As a weakling, how could he have the chance to negotiate with the strong? As for whether he wanted to gamble or not, of course he wanted to. He did not want to continue working for Mahama. He had long hated this method of weakening the strength of his tribe. It was just that he did not have a better way in the past, so he could only endure it. Now that Mahama could not even protect himself, he naturally had to lead his tribe to independence. Okay, I'll do it with you. In the end, he made a firm choice. Gray chuckled upon hearing that. Not bad. You've made a decision that your descendants will be proud of. Trust me. That's right. After he heard this, he revealed a simple and honest smile and laughed. However, there was something that made him even happier. Gray took out a banknote with a face value of 5,000 silver and handed it over to he had never seen banknotes before, let alone Yangxia banknotes. His face was filled with paste. What is this piece of paper used for? Is it a token? It's not a keepsake, but it's very useful. This piece of paper represents 5,000 taels of silver, which can be used to buy a lot of cows and sheep. Of course, believe me, after seeing the prosperity of the Han people, you definitely won't use this money to buy sheep. Gray laughed heartily. He had seen the refined salt, iron pots, sugar, and all kinds of good things that he had never heard of before brought by the 5-star army. This was especially true for down jackets. It was much better than the leather clothes that they sewed themselves. Furthermore, these things could only be bought with the special silver of the Yangxia. This time, Yang Chendong had given him these banknotes, so that the surrendered Mongol tribes could share their wealth after witnessing the prosperity of the Mongol tribes. Of course, 5,000 silver wasn't a small amount. However, to an entire tribe, it wasn't enough. Yang Chendong didn't want to satisfy everyone. Did they want good things? It was simple. They just wanted to work for Yangxia. Talents would have expectations and expectations. In this way, not only would they not oppose Yangxia, they would also speak up for him. Over time, Yangxia's position in the tribe became more and more stable. He didn't know about this. After hearing that it was money, he carefully put it away. However, he still doubtfully said, "How can there be anything better than cattle and sheep in this world? General Gray, don't joke around." Haha. Gray didn't have any intention of arguing with him. He believed that facts spoke louder than words. When the time came, he would be slapped in the face. He led his tribe to join Yangxia. Gray then told him what to pay attention to and what to do next. After that, he went to the other tribes. Just convincing the heir he tribe wasn't enough. Gray had a lot of work to do. Furthermore, in New Sarai, Muhammad didn't know that there were people who had started to oppose him and betray him. He was currently sending people to contact the Ross Duchy. There was no such thing as eternal friends, only eternal benefits. In the face of a great enemy, Muhammad felt immense pressure. He finally listened to the advice of his subordinates and bowed his head to the Ross Duchy. He wanted to contact them to face the Han army together. The Han army's strongest weapon was firearms. This was the weakness of the Golden Horde. Fortunately, the White Russian army was built on firearms. If the two of them could work together, their chances of victory would be much higher. Whether this land belonged to the Ross Duchy or the Golden Horde, it could be discussed. However, it couldn't fall into the hands of an outsider like the Han army. Chapter 1446. After the messengers were sent out, more and more Mongol tribes began to gather outside the city. Muhammad's expression was no longer as ugly as before. When he heard that the Han army had already set out from Salai city, his face turned gloomy and ruthless. Come, this time I will let you know what a human wave tactic is. I will let you know who is the true ruler here. His words were ruthless, but Muhammad, who had already suffered defeat after defeat, did not dare to underestimate Yuhan's army. In view of the previous two failures, he decided to concentrate his forces and launch a fierce attack. He did not believe that the Han army would have an endless supply of gunpowder. As long as he was willing to sacrifice lives, there would be a time when the enemy would run out of gunpowder. At that time, it would be time for him to launch a counterattack. As for the deaths of his cavalry, what did that have to do with him? Even if he could not defeat the Han army, as long as he could delay for a period of time and wait for the Rostdukedom to make their move, the Han army would have to split up. That would be the time for him to launch a counterattack. In any case, this time he would definitely seize every opportunity to launch a counterattack. He would definitely deal a heavy blow to the Han army and chase this nightmare out of his mind. For the sake of this victory, he had used all his trump cards. He had also sent out the 20,000 golden armored cavalry, which was made up of the strongest youths, to be used at the most crucial moment. In order to create these golden armored cavalry, Mahamar had spent a lot of effort. The heavy golden armored cavalry was meant to deal with the White Russian army's musketeers. Now that they were used to deal with the Han army's musketeers, they could be considered to have made the best use of them. Although sending out all 20,000 golden armored cavalrymen would be equivalent to bringing out their final trump card, which would put them in a much more passive position when facing the Russian army in the future, compared to the Han army that was already threatening their lives, the matter at hand was more important. One after another, the tribes began to gather outside New Salai city. The number of tents outside the city was increasing by the day. Every day, there would be dozens of carts of rations being transported out of the city and distributed to the various tribes. Providing rations to the troops was a must. After all, they could not let them fight on empty stomachs. However, this was the only thing that Muhammad could do for everyone. In fact, he didn't trust these tribes. It could be seen from the fact that they weren't even allowed to enter the city. But even so, many tribes were still waiting outside the city. Many small tribes were even sharpening their swords. They wanted to perform well and curry favor with Muhammad. The number of soldiers outside the city increased every day. For example, the 5,000 cavalrymen of the Urhit tribe had also arrived outside the city and found an inconspicuous corner to stay. There were 7 or 8 other tribes like the Urhit tribe, totaling around 30,000 cavalrymen. By the time Yang Chendong and the 5-star army arrived at New Sarai, the Mongolian cavalry had already reached 400,000. 400,000. This Golden Horde Khanate is quite capable. After listening to Su Yunqing's report, Yang Chendong could not help but sigh at the power of the Golden Horde. Have you found out how many tribes are rushing here? Young master, there are about 150,000 people rushing out of the city. It's just that their marching speed is too slow. It's hard to say when they'll arrive. Su Yunqing replied with some difficulty. He blamed himself for not being able to help Yang Chendong relieve his worries. As if seeing through Su Yunqing's confusion, Yang Chendong waved his hand indifferently and smiled. This matter has nothing to do with you. These people are not traveling slowly, but they don't want to participate in this battle. However, they don't dare to not come, so they slowed down their marching speed. This way, they don't have to participate in the battle and won't offend Mahama. People like them are not really our enemies, so we don't have to worry about them for the time being. After listening to Yang Chundong's explanation, Su Yunxing finally understood. Knowing this, he asked excitedly, "Young master, these people won't be here for a while. When are we going to attack?" "Let's rest today. We will attack early tomorrow morning. We want to defeat the enemy in front of everyone. We want to use their mouths to spread the word that the 5-star army is invincible. It will be a nightmare to be our enemy." When Yang Chundong said these words, his eyes revealed a strong sense of confidence. As the industrial system of Crimson City grew step by step, many problems with guns and cannons were solved. He could finally get rid of the need to rely on Datsang to fight. This made him very confident, and also allowed him to increase the pace and speed of unifying the world. "Yes, your subordinate will pass on the order." After Su Yunxing received the order, he was also very excited. After saluting, he turned around and left. Yang Chundong was left in the newly built central tent. He looked at Beta Persei, who was standing quietly but had a restless look in his eyes. "What's wrong? My hands are itching again." Haha. Beta Persei showed a simple and honest look. You have a loyal face, but in fact, your brain is full of petty tricks. Forget it. If that's the case, I'll leave the cannons to you tonight. Remember, don't let the enemy be idle, and prevent them from launching an attack." Yang Chundong looked like he couldn't be bothered with Beta Persei. "Thank you, young master. Don't worry." Beta Persei smiled. He knew that this was the young master's way of compensating him. If there was a chance, he would take the opportunity to kill the enemy. How could he not grasp it? After agreeing, he quickly went out to make arrangements. It was not the first time Beta Persei commanded the artillery, and he was already familiar with it. When he arrived at the camp of the 2nd Cold Front Division's artillery regiment, the regiment commander, Lin Luan, ran out excitedly. As if they were familiar with each other, he immediately asked, "Second brother, is there a mission?" "Sixth master has ordered that a battalion of men from your artillery regiment will cooperate with the work tonight. The rest of you should rest well. Tomorrow is the day of the big battle." Beta Persei patted Lin Luan's shoulder, as if this was just a small battle and the big battle was yet to come. But he completely forgot that in front of Yang Chundong, Beta Persei was much more excited than Lin Luan. "Okay, I'll accompany you tonight, second brother," Lin Luan said excitedly. "No, you have to rest well tonight. Tomorrow morning is the time for you to show your prowess." Beta Persei rejected him mercilessly. What a joke. He didn't want anyone to criticize him when he was commanding. Lin Luan's face immediately turned bitter. "Second brother, let me accompany you. Otherwise, you'll be bored." "It's not boring at all. The sound of the cannons rumbling, your second brother is energized when I hear it." "Okay, you should go and rest." Beta Persei waved his hand impatiently, then seemed to think of something and said, "Oh right, leave me more shells." Seeing that he could not stay, Lin Luan's face turned bitter. "Second brother, we still have to save some shells." "It's okay. I've already sent a telegram to Yang Wu and asked him to arrange for more to be sent over. Just fire as much as you want." Beta Persei chuckled. It was true that he was Yang Chundong's subordinate, but he was also one of his people. Most of the time, his every move was monitored, and it was extremely difficult for him to pull any tricks. But for something as serious as a battle, there was no problem for him to use some connections to get more shells. Even if he reported it to the young master, he was not afraid. Beta Persei even mentioned Yang Wu, and a smile appeared on Lin Luan's face again. With second brother's words, "I know what to do. Don't worry, there will be enough shells for tonight." Lin Luan left satisfied and ordered his men to bring over a few more shells. Beta Persei was waiting for the sky to turn dark, waiting for the time to show off his power. Outside the city of New Sarai, many yurts were lit with smoke, and dinner was being prepared. The Han army had already set up camp 5 miles away, and they had also set up their military tents. Seeing that there would be a big battle tomorrow, everyone was seizing the time to rest. After all, for some people, tonight might be the last night of their lives. When the sky was completely dark, except for some troops in charge of night duty, most of the Mongolian soldiers went into their tents to rest. The time had finally come, and Beta Persei, who had been waiting impatiently for a long time, began to move the field artillery forward. Beta Persei's request was not high. He only wanted to push forward 1 mile. He wanted to ensure that the range of the field artillery could threaten more Mongolian soldiers. In order to cooperate with his actions, the new Second Army's 1st Division commander, Chow Chow, led the cavalry to protect him. Second brother, it's about time. Seeing that the artillery had already pushed forward more than 1 mile, and if they did not stop, they would probably reach the enemy camp. Chow Chow finally could not help but ask, "Oh, then here it is." Beta Persei showed a simple and honest smile, scratched the back of his head, and directed the field artillery to begin to adjust the direction of the artillery fire, measure the ruler, and lock on to the target. Although it was night, the Mongolian army's every move was clearly seen by the Mongolian army. After seeing the other side continuously approaching them in the night, they first watched silently. When the distance between the two sides was less than 3 miles, they were already prepared to charge, and were prepared to summon their troops at any time. At this time, the Han army suddenly stopped. This allowed them to heave a sigh of relief, and they also wanted to see what the other side was going to do. The artillery was blocked by the cavalry of a division. After everything was adjusted, the cavalry moved aside, and the artillery finally appeared. The Mongolian scouts also saw it clearly. "Not good, it's artillery. Quick, inform the rear." When a scout finally saw the Han army's actions, his heart trembled. He did not expect the Han army to use artillery in the night, and he shouted in shock. Chapter 1447. It must be said that the Golden Horde also had some cannons. However, compared to them, there were very few of them and their range was very short. Because of that, they did not dare to take the risk of using them in the dark. What if they were destroyed by the Han cavalry? On this point, the 5-star army did not have so many misgivings. Be it in terms of range or numbers, they were willing to take the risk. They also had the strength to take the risk. After all, there was still a regiment of cold vanguard soldiers mixed in with the 1st Regiment. The 2nd Regiment's 2nd Regiment commander, Zhong Guangquan, was afraid that the enemy would not come. The cavalry dodged to the sides, and under Beta Persei's orders, the cannons began to fire towards the Mongolian camp. The direction of the cannons was towards the middle of the Mongolian camp. That was where most of the enemies were gathered, and they were also the ones who supported the Great Khan. As for the smaller tribes like He, they had already received news that their general's camp was in a corner and was not within the range of the cannons. In the originally silent night, the sound of cannons suddenly rang out. One by one, the tents were bombarded until there was nothing left. Who knew how many Mongolian soldiers were still sleeping when they were born, going to meet the Tungri that they trusted so much? There were a total of 50 cannons, and every shot was accompanied by 50 furious roars. Everywhere the cannons blasted, flames and cries of pain could be heard. The sound of the cannons alerted the other Mongolian soldiers, and they were unable to sleep. Instead, they walked out of their tents, their eyes and mouths wide open as they stared at the hellish scene in front of them. Amongst them were the leaders of the smaller tribes like he who had been persuaded by Gray. They had crossed swords with the White Russians before and had seen the power of their cannons. From their point of view, the cannons that could shoot a huge iron bullet with a single shot were already very terrifying. They were already a headache for them. However, in comparison, the cannons of the Han army were much more powerful. The cannons would explode after hitting their targets, causing shrapnel and metal fragments to fly in all directions. It was truly fatal. Did you not see the soldiers who were 7 or 8 steps away from the explosion falling to the ground? Even the war horses they were riding couldn't escape. They were knocked down to the ground by the remaining power of the blossom bullet and screeched incessantly. Are these the cannons of the Han army? Many of the Mongolian soldiers who were not hit by the cannons looked at this scene with fear in their hearts. Many of them even exchanged glances with each other, as if to say, how could they resist the power of such artillery with mere manpower? If the Han army had such an endless supply of cannons, How could they fight this battle? How many people would it take to rush in front of them and brandish their sabers? As for Air, he and the others, they completely believed Gray's words. This time, the Han army did not have a good feeling about this. It seemed that their choice to trust the other party and surrender was the right choice. The cannons were still firing. In less than an hour, hundreds of tents had been destroyed, and tens of thousands of people had been hit, either dead or injured. Finally, the cannons stopped firing, as if they were tired and wanted to rest. On both sides of the cannon formation, regardless of whether it was the 2nd Cavalry Division of the new 2nd Army or the 2nd Cold Front Division, a sliver of disappointment appeared on their faces. Originally, they had assumed that the Mongolian cavalry would not be able to endure such torture and would take the initiative to charge over. However, who would have thought that after an hour of cannons firing, not a single one of them had charged over? This caused them to be greatly disappointed, and they scolded the Mongolian cavalry for not having any backbone in their hearts. Let's rest for a while and lower the temperature of the cannons before firing again. Beta Persei lit up a cigarette in satisfaction and threw the rest to the soldiers beside him. Then, without caring about his image, he sat down on the ground with a satisfied smile on his face. The previous round of cannons firing was extremely satisfying and had also achieved the goal of not letting the Mongolian army rest. When he looked at the 5-star army camp behind him, they were still incomparably silent. Clearly, they had already received the news and did not bother about the cannons firing. They should sleep if they had to. One side was full of energy after a night of rest, while the other side was extremely tired. Even in terms of soldiers, they had a 30% advantage. When Beta Persei thought about how all of this was achieved under his command, he could not help but feel extremely satisfied. The cannons of the Han army finally stopped firing, and the soldiers in the Mongolian camp heaved a sigh of relief. The Mongolian soldiers who were fortunate enough not to be hit by the cannons naturally rejoiced, but at the same time, they started to set up their tents. There was still a huge battle tomorrow, and they still needed to rest. However, it was a pity that the area in front of the city gates could not be used anymore. That area was filled with craters caused by the cannons, and the ground was also covered in blood. Furthermore, there were corpses everywhere, and the stench was extremely strong. They could not stay there any longer. There was not enough space, so they could only move to the sides. Using this chance, the Earth tribes also moved their tents, moving to the sides. Their actions were ridiculed by the other Mongol tribes, while the tribes loyal to Muhammad took the opportunity to occupy those places for their army to set up camp. On the city walls of New Salai City, Prince Bola saw all of this, and his expression was extremely solemn. We can't go on like this. Who knows if the Han army will use their cannons again? Just in case, we need to be prepared. Where's Hulihan? I order you to lead the 5,000 cavalry and prepare to charge. The moment the Han army uses their cannons again, charge up without caring about the cost and destroy them. As he spoke, Bol turned his head to the side and looked at Hurihan, who was wearing a suit of armor. Bola looked down on Hulihan in his heart. He was just a dog that had lost his home because of the Han army. Such a coward was not worthy of standing beside him. If it was not for the fact that he was in dire need of manpower, he would have dealt with this person long ago. However, even so, he could not let him off so easily. Bola had already heard that if it were not for this Hulihan provoking the Han army in the Far East, they would not have come to his territory. It could be said that this person was the root of the problem, the source of the war. With such an understanding, how could Bola treat Hulihan well? Sending him out this time was equivalent to sending him to his death. When the ashen-faced Hulihan heard that he was going to be deployed in the middle of the night, he dropped to his knees and begged, "Your Highness, please spare this lowly one. This lowly one is willing to serve you as my master and serve you for generations to come." Seeing that Hulihan did not want to lead the troops, Bola's face sank, and his voice became cold. "What? You want to go against my orders?" "This, Your Highness, it is not that this lowly one wants to go against your orders. It is just that the Han army's cannons are too powerful. Furthermore, they are taking the initiative to attack, so it is impossible for them not to be prepared. Attacking in the middle of the night is too short-sighted, and it is not suitable. Houlihan opened his mouth and spouted nonsense. Humph. Even if it is the middle of the night and we cannot see through the enemy, they should not be able to see through us either, right? This is the best time to attack. Do not worry. As long as you can kill your way through, this prince will immediately order the army to follow up. At that time, you will have the greatest merit. Bola rejected Houlihan's request and gave the order in a resolute tone. Since he had already said that, if Houlihan still refused, he would not even have the chance to charge and would be taken down by Bola. Thinking that there was at least a chance of survival if he attacked, he could only nod. Since that is the case, this lowly one will lead the men to charge. I only hope that your highness can grasp the opportunity and send the army to kill them. I know. As for what to do, this prince will naturally have his own plans. Go and prepare. I will give you an hour. Bola said impatiently. Bola still stood on the city wall. He had a feeling that the Han army would not stop here. If it was him, with the advantage of the cannons, he would also take the opportunity to increase his gains. The truth was as he had expected. An hour later, the cannons sounded out once more, and the Mongol camp that had just moved their tents were once again baptized by cannon fire. Attack? Tell Houlihan to attack immediately. On the city wall, Bola's eyes were spitting fire as he watched all of this. Although to the Mongol army that had hundreds of thousands of men, the loss of 10 to 20,000 would not be a huge blow, but it would be a huge blow to their morale. If they did not do anything, their morale would definitely plummet, and that would not be a good thing for the battle tomorrow. As for whether or not the enemy would be prepared after sending out Houlihan, that was for sure. However, he still sent out those 5,000 men to see if the Han army was prepared or not. Once he found an opportunity, he would not hesitate and would immediately give the order for the army to attack. On the other hand, if there was no opportunity, he would just sacrifice Houlihan's 5,000 cavalry. Those were not his own men, so what if they died? The city gates opened, and Houlihan led his 5,000 cavalry to charge out. The battle cries were especially ear-piercing in the night. Houlihan still had some brains. After he received the order, he immediately went to his camp and called for his subordinates to pass on Bola's orders. Brothers, it wasn't easy for this general to obtain this opportunity to render meritorious service. As long as we can charge out tonight and destroy the cannons of the Han army, it will be a great merit. In the future, endless wealth awaits us. What about the future? It all depends on tonight. I'm willing to be the vanguard and obtain the greatest merit. All the generals were pumped up by Houlihan's words, and they were all raring to go. They could not wait to charge out of the city and charge towards the cannons. Chapter 1448. Thus, the moment the city gates opened, the 5,000 cavalrymen charged out of the city. However, the moment they stepped out of the city, they saw flames and cries of agony everywhere. It was as if a basin of cold water had been poured over their heads, causing fear to rise in the hearts of the cavalry who had originally vowed solemnly to fear. Previously, they were all in the city. Although they could hear the sound of the cannons, it was only hearsay. They did not see it with their own eyes. However, now that they saw the destruction of the city with their own eyes, they were afraid. Their horses were also afraid. They neighed continuously and did not dare to move forward. Charge! The military order is in front of us. There is no way back. Only by charging forward can we survive. Those who do well will be rewarded. Charge! Although Houlihan was prepared for this, his expression was unsightly, but his tone was still firm. He knew that if he didn't even have the courage to rush out now, Borar would probably hang his corpse on the city gate tower for disobeying orders. Houlihan shouted as he took the lead and rushed out. The power of an example was endless. With the help of the light from the cannons, the army saw that even their former Khan, who was now their general, was the first to charge out. Everyone was encouraged, and at the same time, they continued to shout and charge forward. At the five-star army's cannons, the sounds of battle could be heard. Both Li Jun and Zhongguanquan stood up excitedly. First, they listened attentively. Then, they thought of something and their eyes lit up. They're here. The enemy is finally here. Ha ha ha. Soldiers of the Cold Vanguard, check your guns and prepare for battle. Zhongguanquan laughed loudly. Cavalrymen, prepare to charge as well. Li Jun turned around and gave orders to the other commanders. Then, he walked over to Zhong Guangquan with a sneaky smile. Commander Zhong, please show mercy. You must leave some soup for us cavalry brothers. No problem, no problem. We are only responsible for the enemy cavalry within 100 steps. Once they enter this range, it will be your cavalry's turn. How about it? Zhong Guangquan agreed generously. Thank you, thank you. Li Jun thanked him profusely and turned around to make the arrangements. Zhong Guangquan looked at the battalion commanders beside him and said, You all heard what I said just now. The rest will depend on your performance. Try your best to eliminate all the enemies from 100 steps away. Yes. The battalion commanders hurriedly agreed, and then returned to their respective camps to give out battle orders. At this moment, Hulahan was leading 5,000 cavalry over from the 5-star army cannon formation. There was a distance of 6 to 7 kilometers between the city gate and the cannon formation, but for the elite cavalry, it would only take the time it took to brew a cup of tea to reach it. With the continuous running, the speed of the cavalry was also at its best. At this time, the cavalry only needed to hold the scimitar in their hands to easily chop off the head of the enemy. This was the strength of the cavalry. However, that was only possible if the cavalry could reach the enemy. When the cold vanguard warriors fired the first shot from 400 steps away, this seemingly simple mission became an impossible one. Da-da-da, da-da-da-da. In the darkness of the night, it was impossible to see how many enemies there were, and it was impossible to accurately determine the enemy's position. At this moment, the light and heavy machine guns displayed their advantage. Bullets flew forward like raindrops. Under the blanket attack, one after another, the cavalrymen from afar were hit. They either fell off their horses or fell to the ground with their horses. Hurahan had already slowed down not long after he started charging, intentionally falling behind. He had fought the 5-star army more than once, so he knew better than any of the Mongolian soldiers how strong the enemy was. Because of this, he knew better than anyone else the difficulty of the mission. He hid at the back because he wanted to act according to the situation. If they really charged in front of the 5-star army and made a contribution, he would stand out and take the credit. On the other hand, if things went wrong, he would find an opportunity to escape. Although this would incur the wrath of Bola, it was nothing compared to staying alive. Hulahan's idea was good, but he neglected one point, which was the power of the 5-star army's guns. They weren't using the guns that the Russians bought from the West. They weren't the kind that could only hit iron balls and had limited range. They were using the Type 95, which was 500 years ahead of the current era. The current Crimson City could already replicate the Type 95 after many years of development. As for the bullets, they were already successfully manufactured and used in the army. Facing such a powerful gun, if you used the old way of thinking to deal with it, you would have doomed Hulahan to a tragic end, especially when he underestimated the fighting spirit of the 5-star army and their determination to destroy them. That was equivalent to destroying his last hope. Under the continuous firing of the light and heavy machine guns, squad machine guns, and the Type 95, the charging Mongol cavalry fell one after another on their way forward. None of them were able to get within 100 steps of the enemy. While this greatly damaged the enemy, it also made Commander Li anxious. He originally thought that in the darkness, no matter how elite the Cold Front warriors were, they wouldn't be able to destroy the enemy and he would have a chance to act. But now it seemed that he had miscalculated. Since that was the case, he decided that he couldn't wait any longer. All soldiers, get on your horses and prepare to charge. Since Zhong Guangquan didn't give him a chance, he would create one himself. Seeing that the enemy had lost more than half of their men, if they didn't attack, they wouldn't have a chance. Thus, Commander Li decided to lead the soldiers to charge and take the initiative to enter the battlefield to kill the enemy. The soldiers of the new 2nd Army's 2nd Cavalry Division, who couldn't wait any longer, were waiting for this order. Seeing that their commander was going all out, they had nothing to be afraid of. After receiving the order, they quickly rushed out and went straight to the center of the battlefield. F***CK, stop shooting. Zhong Guangquan saw the 2nd Cavalry Division's actions and quickly ordered them to stop in shock. The gunshots immediately stopped, which prevented them from killing their allies by mistake. Although the gunshots had stopped, Zhong Guangquan jumped up and walked to Yang Er, who had just stopped the bombardment, with a bitter look on his face. Second brother, look, some people don't care about martial ethics. Yang was currently instructing the soldiers to lower the temperature of the cannons when he saw Zhong Guangquan walking over aggressively. He snorted and said, I say, Regiment Leader Zhong, we can't just focus on satisfying our cravings and monopolize everything. Just now, your cold front warriors had a good time killing. It's reasonable for the cavalry brothers to be anxious. We should understand each other. Beta Persei's answer was obviously biased towards the new Second Army, which made Zhong Guangquan a little dissatisfied. He thought to himself, when it comes to eating alone, I'm afraid no one is better than you, Beta Persei. Look, you even sent Commander Lin Luan back. But he didn't dare to say these words out loud. If he really offended Beta Persei, even their commander, Xiaofeng, wouldn't be able to protect him. Zhong Guangquan didn't say anything. Beta Persei's purpose of suppressing their momentum had been achieved, so he said like a good old man, Okay, when Commander Li comes back later, I'll talk to him. Your cold front warriors performed very well this time. I'll report to the young master later. But remember to guard against arrogance and rashness. You have to know that a big reason for your excellence is the advanced firearms in your hands, understand? It was precisely because the cold front warriors had mastered the most advanced firearms that they had such powerful combat power. But when they won so many battles, they seemed to think that they represented powerful combat power. Yang Chendong had mentioned this to the cold front warriors more than once. Beta Persei did this because he was following Yang Chendong's orders. When these words fell into Zhong Guangquan's ears, his expression became incomparably serious. He knew that he did have the intention to eat alone just now, and Beta Persei saw through it. Thinking that this time was a reminder, he was afraid that he wouldn't let it go so easily next time. He immediately said with an attitude of admitting his mistake, Second brother, you're right. I was indeed a little impulsive just now, but if there's a next time, we'll definitely discuss it with the cavalry brothers. This attitude is needed. Beta Persei's expression became much better, and he nodded in satisfaction. The gunshots stopped, and the Mongolian cavalry who were lying prone on their horses felt the pressure on them lessen. The people in front were either dead or charging forward. Hulihan, who was hiding at the back, had a look of joy in his eyes. It must be that the Han army's firearms ran out of ammunition. Hulihan thought to himself. Wasn't this where his opportunity lied? He immediately got up from his horse and shouted, Brothers, the Han army's firearms are out of gunpowder. This is the time for us to perform meritorious deeds. Charge! Those cavalrymen who were scared out of their wits were originally in a daze, but when they heard their general shout, they were all overjoyed. Didn't they persevere until now to perform meritorious deeds? Now that the opportunity had come, who would think of letting it go? Everyone immediately sat on their horses and waved their sabers, shouting and yelling once again. However, what welcomed them was not silence, but a stampede that shook the mountains. With Division Commander Li at the lead, more than 8,000 cavalrymen charged forward. Each of them held their breath and charged forward. The soldiers of the 2nd Cold Front Division had their fill, but how could the cavalrymen who became spectators be satisfied? Seeing other people perform meritorious deeds, they were also itching to perform. Finally, the division commander toughened up and gave the order to charge. Which soldier did not rush forward, afraid that if they were a step late, they would not be able to perform any meritorious deeds. Close to 10,000 cavalrymen, their morale was high, and their killing intent was heavy. The moment they clashed with the Mongolian cavalry, they swept through them. They held divine sabers in their hands, which were not only sharp, but also tough. The soldiers of the 5-star army roared as they charged forward. As they waved their sabers, the war horses crossed each other, and the Mongol cavalrymen were sliced in half. Their horses fell to the ground one after another, letting out a neigh before they died. Chapter 1449. Hulihan charged forward with hope, but that hope quickly turned into disappointment and then into despair. He would never have thought that the 5-star army would dare to charge with cavalry. At this moment, he finally felt that there was no path to heaven and no door to hell. If it was just a musket attack, as long as he didn't charge into the effective shooting range of the enemy, they wouldn't be able to do anything to him. But it was different with cavalry. When the enemy came in front of him, he didn't even have the chance to dodge or escape. Within a short period of time, Houlihan saw his subordinates being slaughtered off their horses one by one. Their horses fell to the ground in rows. Houlihan's face was filled with shock as he turned his horse around and fled. At this moment, he had forgotten all about the merits and the charge. The only thing that mattered to him was his survival. Tisk, where do you think you're going? Using the moonlight, Military Commander Li took the lead and killed several enemies. He rushed to the front and saw Houlihan, who was wearing a general's armor, trying to turn around and escape. It was said that one could recognize a woman by smell. On the battlefield, one could recognize the identity of the enemy by their armor. It was difficult for Houlihan, who was wearing a general's armor, not to attract attention. With a shout, Military Commander Li's intuition told him that he had caught a big fish this time. Immediately, he took out the bow on his back and released an arrow. The arrow pierced through the air and headed straight for Houlihan's mount. Shoot the horse first. Relying on his skillful horsemanship, he shot an arrow with great precision, and it landed on the back hoof of Houlihan's warhorse. When the arrow pierced through the horse's leg, the warhorse let out a mournful neigh and stood facing the sky. The sudden rearing of the warhorse caught Houlihan off guard. By the time he realized that something was wrong, he had already been thrown off by the warhorse. After a roll, he felt pain all over his body. Needless to say, this fall had injured his bones. However, on the battlefield, life and death were only a matter of an instant. At this moment, Houlihan didn't even have time to check on his injuries. All he needed to do now was to continue running. Enduring the pain in his body, Houlihan stood up. Before he could identify the direction, a strong gust of wind hit his body. Instinctively, he raised his sword to block. With a crisp ding sound, a strong force passed through his right arm and knocked Houlihan, who had just stood up, back to the ground. The man borrowed the horse's momentum, and his strength increased by more than 2 times. Houlihan was once again injured by this attack, and he fell to the ground once more. With injuries on top of injuries, Houlihan felt that standing up had become a luxury. At this moment, a scene that made his hair stand on end happened. The warhorse that had just chopped him down had turned around and charged towards him once again. Houlihan cursed in his heart and gathered all his strength to crawl on the ground as quickly as he could. At this moment, there was only one voice in his mind, and that was to escape. Even if he had to crawl, he had to escape. With a chi-la sound, Houlihan felt a sudden pain behind him. The strength that he had just gathered in his body dissipated. Feeling that the horse on him had been chopped in half and hot blood was flowing from its back, Houlihan's eyes finally revealed a look of despair. At this moment, the scene of him leading his troops into the far eastern region of Al City unknowingly appeared in his mind. Thinking back to that time, how glorious was he! He never showed mercy to his opponents and killed as he pleased. How long had it been, and this scene was about to happen to him? Perhaps if he could redo his life, he definitely wouldn't have chosen to be enemies with the 5-star army. Li Jun stopped his horse and looked at the back of the enemy who was still trying to fight back. He shook his head and said, "Don't blame anyone. If you want to blame someone, blame yourselves for being enemies with our 5-star army." After he finished speaking, Li Jun once again bent down and raised his blade. A bloody head flew into the air. Houlihan, who had once dared to take the initiative to find trouble with the 5-star army, had become an ice-cold corpse. Following Houlihan's death, the 5,000 cavalrymen he led on the battlefield were either dead, injured, or surrendered. After not seeing a single enemy on the battlefield, Li Jun's division commander was satisfied and returned with the army. On the city tower of New Salai City, scouts were constantly reporting the results of the battle. They reported Houlihan's death and the 5,000 cavalrymen's annihilation to Prince Bola. Hiss! Bola only felt his teeth hurt. Although this was the result he had long expected, when it happened, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Not only did the Han army have powerful firearms, but even their cavalrymen were so fierce. Could they really win against such an opponent? This was the first time Bola felt a sense of helplessness and fear of the unknown future. This night was spent amidst the gunfire. Every half an hour, there would be the sound of cannon fire. Whenever someone tried to launch a cavalry charge, What awaited them was endless gunfire and a crazy cavalry charge. This scene only ended when the sky began to brighten. During the night, the Mongolian army didn't get any rest. They spent the night in fear because no one could guarantee that the next cannon fire wouldn't fall on their heads. When the sky was bright, Yang Chendong also walked out of the tent. At this time, he was clearly in good spirits. After sleeping all the way until dawn, his mental state was at its peak. Young master, as soon as he walked out of the tent, Beta Persei excitedly greeted him, then laughed foolishly. There was no need to say anything. Just by looking at Beta Persei's appearance, he knew that last night's harvest was not small. What's the matter? Are you here to report the results? Yes, young master, Beta Persei said with a happy face. Young master, according to incomplete statistics, we killed and injured more than 30,000 enemies last night. Among them, we destroyed more than 800 of the enemy's tents. Haha, they didn't get any sleep last night. It seems that our chances of winning today's battle are much higher. Not bad. Hearing the results, Yang Chendong was also very satisfied. The meaning of last night's battle was not how many enemies were killed, but how much courage the enemy had. As a result, how could an army without morale be a match for the high-spirited 5-star army? Well, you've been tired all night. Go and rest, Yang Chendong said with concern, then prepared to go to the front line to supervise the battle. No, young master, I'm not tired. Beta Persei shook his head vigorously. They were facing a battle with hundreds of thousands of people today. How could he miss out on such an occasion? As for not resting for a night, it was really nothing for people like them who lived on the battlefield all year round. Seeing that Beta Persei wanted to continue to fight, Yang Chendong had no intention of stopping him. There were some things that even if he spoke, he could stop the other party's actions, but he could not stop the other party's anxious heart. If that was the case, it was better to let Beta Persei continue to fight. Okay, if that's the case, you continue to take care of the artillery regiment. All right, those 8 mortars, get ready and wait for orders. See if you can shoot down a big guy. Beta Persei, who had long been used to commanding artillery, immediately agreed with a smile. Young master, you're good, ha ha ha. The sky was bright, and Bola also let out a long sigh of relief. Although he didn't have much confidence in winning the upcoming battle, at least they could fight back during the day. With their superior military strength, even if they exchanged 1 for 2, or even 3, they would still be able to fight back. There was no need to continue to be beaten up. Bola's idea was to fight with the Han army in the open. He had already thought of a countermeasure during the night and continued to charge. He wanted to see how much gunpowder the Han army had and how long they could last. For this reason, he had already ordered people to invite the tribal leaders. He wanted to make a promise to raise their morale as much as possible and deal a heavy blow to the Han army. Once both sides started to suffer heavy casualties, he did not believe that the Han army would not retreat. He did not believe that the Han army would be able to hold their ground after coming so far, and with the Ross principalities behind them, he did not believe that the Han army would be able to hold their ground. Once they retreated, it would be time for him to lead his army and attack. At that time, it would not be difficult to reclaim all the lost land. More importantly, once he defeated the Han army, he would have the other side's firearms. In this way, the White Russian army would have nothing to fear. At that time, the Golden Horde would regain its glory. At that time, once he gave the order, it would not be impossible for him to regain the prestige of his ancestors. In the camp of the 5-star army, the soldiers were eating breakfast. Yang Chendong would never mistreat his soldiers in terms of food, drink, and clothing. They had even sold their lives to him. So wasn't it natural for him to improve their quality of life? For this reason, he took out the canned meat that was provided to the 5-star army and gave it to each of the Mongolian cavalry who had just joined. Fortunately, there were steam engines, lathes, and production lines now. Many provinces and regions had begun to encourage the people to raise poultry in large quantities. The government would take care of the unsold poultry. In this way, the raw meat and meat processing could keep up. There were more and more military rations like this, enough to meet the needs of the army. Otherwise, just in terms of food alone, the needs of hundreds of thousands of people on an expedition would be enough to give people a headache. The Mongolian cavalry ate the canned meat in their hands with a satisfied smile on their faces. They had never seen such things even in their dreams. Now that they had enough, it was a happy thing. Perhaps they had never been treated like this before. Some of the Mongolian soldiers were secretly hiding food. In their eyes, it was not enough for them to eat such good food. They should share it with their families and let them know what the so-called delicacies in the world were. Chapter 1450. He had already expected something like this to happen. He also knew that people who were used to living a hard life valued food. Yang Chendong had already given the relevant orders. When the commander of the new Second Army saw the scene of people hiding food in the camp, he sighed and walked towards a temporary platform in the camp. As he walked, his expression was still unsightly. Various factions often appeared in the grasslands. This leader, that big man. They were either brave, cunning, or living in a balance. However, no matter which leader they were, they did not change the fact that they had to solve the problem of food and clothing for their people. On the grasslands, the more they fought, the poorer they became. The population also became smaller and smaller. They had no choice but to rob. If they encountered the Han people of the Central Plains who were easy to bully, they could barely survive. However, once the Han people were strong, they could only run away with their tails between their legs. Thinking about it, how sad was that? Since that was the case, why not follow the sixth young master? Although he was not a Mongolian, he was the only one who could let the Mongolian people eat and not starve. He could let the Mongolian people wear clothes and not suffer from the cold. He could also let the Mongolian people live in the city and have something to do. They did not need to live a life of bloodshed. Since that was the case, why not sell their lives to the sixth young master? What they wanted, what they needed, he could satisfy them. He was not like some people who insisted on the meaning of the golden bloodline. Could it be that with such a bloodline, they could live a better life? Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. When he walked to the platform, he had already made up his mind. He would follow Yang Chendong to the end. Not only him, but he would also persuade more people. In the past, he served in the 5-star army to repay Yang Chendong's kindness. However, from now on, he would serve wholeheartedly for the sake of a better life and future for the Mongolian people. On the platform, it was as if he had become a different person. He stood tall, and his voice spread in all directions with the help of a simple loudspeaker. Brothers, I've lived a hard life like all of you, and I deeply understand what you're doing now. However, I still have to say that we are about to go to war. If you keep food on your body, it will not be beneficial for the next operation. Trust me, put down those things and eat them. As long as we can win the next battle, there will be a lot of good things like this. You will eat until the day you vomit. What? Eat until you vomit? The Ming cavalry soldiers shook their heads in disbelief. In his opinion, how could he have enough of such delicious food? *T. As for spitting it out, just how wasteful of an action was that? It was shameful and would be cursed by the clansmen. He looked at the soldiers with an understanding gaze. How could he not have such thoughts in the past? However, his initial suspicions became reality. There was a time when he was sick of eating canned meat. Although it wasn't to the point of vomiting, it was close to the point of vomiting. This was unimaginable in the past when he was short of food and clothing. She could understand what the soldiers were thinking, so she said with empathy, I know what everyone is thinking, but the facts will prove who is right and who is wrong. Next, let's talk about the standards of merit. Those who capture a head on the battlefield will be rewarded with 20 Chinese coins. Those who capture 2 heads will be rewarded with 50 Chinese coins and a can of canned meat. Those who capture 3 heads. For people who had been starving all year round, there was nothing more tempting to them than food. This was far better than being promised a high position and a generous salary. This was something that could be seen and touched. Those who capture 1 person will be rewarded with 20 Chinese coins and a tael of refined salt. Those who capture 2 people will be rewarded with 50 Chinese coins and a can of canned meat. Those who capture 3 people will be rewarded with. She held the list of rewards that she had prepared beforehand and continued to read aloud. These rewards were all very edible. There were salt, sugar, iron pots, canned meat, rice, and even down jackets. As long as one achieved great merit on the battlefield, they would be rewarded handsomely after the battle. The warriors below listened quietly. After learning that there were so many different kinds of rewards, many of them looked forward to it. Some of them even started to consider whether they should kill or capture more people in the upcoming battle. It seemed like the reward for capturing people alive was much better. The 100,000 Ming soldiers who had just been incorporated and had not had time to reorganize were motivated just like that. There was no need to do any ideological work, nor was there any need to hold a meeting to reminisce about the past. All they needed to do was to take out the rewards and place them together for the soldiers to see. This was already a great stimulation. When the rewards were placed in front of them, and there were quite a few of them, all of the soldiers were moved. They all looked at the items that they needed and thought about how to perform in the upcoming battle to achieve their goals. This was the power of capital. This was the human potential that was stimulated by material needs. Looking at this scene, Shibei believed that he did not need to say anything, and everyone would give it their all. All he needed to do was pray for the enemy. At 9:00 in the morning, which was the time of the ancient times, 100,000 Ming soldiers left the camp and started to get into formation, preparing to attack. In contrast, the side in charge of defense had been waiting for a long time. Looking from afar, the crowd in front of New Sarai was a sea of people. It was impossible to count how many tribes and how many soldiers there were with the naked eye. Even when facing the rising Ross principalities, the Golden Horde did not put up such a grand display. Judging from this, they already regarded the 5-star army as their strongest opponent. Vaguely, they could see that there were still dozens of cannons erected on the walls of New Salai City, and there were people busy working there. It was obvious that these cannons had just been set up to stop the 5-star Legion's attack. Beta Persei used his binoculars to look at the dozens of cannons, and his eyes showed disdain. In terms of cannons, the enemy was nothing. In his eyes, these cannons were targets that could be attacked at any time. It was meaningless. Around the cannons, a group of nobles of the Golden Horde were standing there in luxurious clothes. As the saying goes, one can see far from a high place. These dignitaries appeared here as if they were the rulers of the war. Take a look and see if you are familiar with any of them. Yang Chendong also noticed the changes on the city tower and handed the binoculars to General Gray, who had just finished persuading the nobles. He reached out and took the binoculars respectfully, then looked up with a hint of excitement. He had heard of this divine tool that could easily see thousands of meters away, but this was the first time he used it. He could not help but feel excited and nervous. It took him a while to familiarize himself with the use of the binoculars. When he looked up at the city wall, he quickly said excitedly, "I see it, I see it. The Khan is on the city tower." Uhama? When he heard the Khan's voice, Yang Chendong was also interested. Yes, it's a Hama. Gray's face was a little red, and he was a little embarrassed. He had forgotten that he was no longer a member of the Golden Horde. He had just said the Khan out of habit. Haha, very good. When he heard that a Hama was on the city tower, Yang Chendong also became excited. If they could get rid of the enemy's big boss at the start of the battle, then this battle would be much easier. He estimated that the Khan was at least 6 miles away. Muskets would definitely not be able to hit him. Even if field cannons could hit him, their power would inevitably be limited. If they missed, the enemy would escape, and they would miss a great opportunity. Well, inform Beta Persei to use the mortars. They must hit accurately and solve the biggest problem in one shot. Also, inform Tianyu to fly up and attract the enemy's attention. Yang Chendong quickly came up with a plan in his mind and immediately told Pan. This time, in order to deal with the Golden Horde, Yang Chendong sent a telegram to the Air Force of Chichen City to rush over. Compared to when the Air Force was first established, they had nothing. Now, the Air Force had become an army of its own. Although they could not build a real plane to give them a platform to display their abilities. But there was no problem in controlling hot air balloons, hydrogen balloons, and individual paragliders. They could also complete the ability to launch gunpowder attacks from high altitude and land. At this time, the commander of the Tianyu army was checking the equipment of the soldiers at the back of the army. For a long time, the Air Force was like a deaf person's ear decoration. It had an empty name, but no actual power. Because of this, Tianyu always had a feeling of being unable to raise his head. Especially when the city lord's mansion allocated a huge amount of money to the Air Force every year, he felt even more pressure. Fortunately, no matter what other people thought of them, the sixth young master always supported him. If he wanted money, he would give him money, he would give him people, and he would give him technology. After receiving support from all sides, Tianyu had been suppressing his anger for a long time. Ever since he achieved military merits in pacifying Ryukyu Island, he was even more convinced that the Air Force was a powerful force. Then, he worked hard day and night. Next, he led people to break through one obstacle after another. The problem of the hot air balloon's direction of ascent, the problem of the load, the problem of the stability of the altitude, the problem of the accuracy after dropping the explosives, including when to let it explode, to what extent the accuracy was, and so on. There were also hydrogen balloons that could fly higher and individual paragliders, how to carry out activities and reconnaissance behind the enemy's back, and so on. Over the years, the problems were solved one after another, and then they were solved again. Until now, the problems encountered have been solved, and the exercises have been done many times. Now, they only lacked real combat experience. Chapter 1451. Now, the opportunity was here. How could Tianyu not be excited? If he didn't need to command from the ground, he would have already ascended with the hot air balloons. Even so, he still walked to the division commander, who was also the leading officer, Sun Lixing. Division Commander Sun, this time, whether or not our Air Force can make a name for ourselves, it's all up to you. Do you have any questions? I promised to complete the mission. Sun Lixing wasn't tall, and his body was thin. But his overall balance was very good, and most importantly, he wasn't afraid of heights. There was an experiment where when the hydrogen balloon ascended to more than 1,000 meters, he could still remain calm, as if he was on land. This kind of psychological quality was tailor-made for air, so his military rank rose again and again. And this time, the actual combat command mission was given to him by Tianyu after careful consideration. He firmly believed that this person would be able to complete the mission well. Good. Remember, keep an eye on my flag to ensure that my orders are carried out smoothly and destroy the main target. Tianyu patted Sun Lixing's shoulder again and said earnestly. At this time, the communications officer came over and conveyed Yang Qindong's order to ascend into the air. Tianyu thought to himself, here it comes. Next, he looked at the spectacular scene of 50 hot air balloons ascending into the air. The five-star army decided to use the hot air balloons, which was one of Yang Qindong's trump cards. The range of the mortars was only about 13 miles. Compared to his target, it was still too far away. Although there were more powerful cannons in the warehouse, Yang Qindong didn't intend to use them. He believed that with his current strength, it was enough to defeat the Golden Horde. Yang Qindong was prepared, and the Golden Horde certainly wouldn't passively take a beating. Just as both sides were mobilizing their troops and preparing for a great battle, their reinforcements arrived. From afar, the gates of New Salai City opened wide, and a steady stream of cavalry swarmed out. Not only that, the other gates opened one after another, and more cavalry rushed out of the city, then gathered together and circled to the front of the battlefield. Ha ha ha, this time I want to see how the Han army will defeat this Khan. Standing on top of the city gate tower, Mahama laughed heartily as he watched more and more cavalrymen join the battle. His expression was extremely confident. This time, in order to deal with the Han army, he had spent a lot of money and agreed to a series of conditions. In the end, he managed to invite two powerful reinforcements, the 150,000 Circassian cavalry and the 100,000 Alan cavalry. There were 250,000 cavalrymen in total. When they appeared on the battlefield, it was as if they blotted out the sky. The surging cavalrymen covered the entire battlefield, giving people a feeling that they were endless. When the 250,000 cavalrymen raised their scimitars and shouted the word kill, their murderous aura surged. Even though the cavalry of the new Second Army were brave and experienced in battle, they were still frightened by the enemy's formation. The appearance of 250,000 cavalrymen was something that even Yang Qindong did not expect. Because they came in a hurry, the intelligence department did not have time to infiltrate New Salai City. This was also because Yang Qindong's attack was too fast. so fast that the intelligence department did not have time to implement their plans. The sudden addition of 250,000 cavalrymen made the Mongolian cavalrymen, who had been tormented for an entire night, feel more confident. In terms of military strength alone, the Golden Horde had more than 500,000 men, while the Han army only had about 200,000. This was more than twice the number of the Han army, giving them hope of victory. Good fellow, there are quite a lot of people. Ha ha ha. The heartless Beta Persei laughed heartily. Only a careless person like him would ignore the enemy's numbers. He thought that with so many enemies, how many could he blow up with one shot? Wouldn't that be great? There was also another person who was not afraid, and that was Yang Chundong. Yang Chundong already knew about the Circassians and the Alans. According to his plan, after dealing with the Golden Horde, he would deal with them. If they were obedient, it would be fine. If they dared to resist, he would just kill them. However, he did not expect that they would take the initiative to appear on the battlefield. This saved him a lot of effort, and he could kill them all in one fell swoop. Men, raise the flag and bring me my golden cloak. Yang Chundong's eyes were calm as he said calmly. What he wanted to do was simple. He wanted to stand on the front line and let all the soldiers see him at any time to encourage their determination to fight. As long as his flag did not fall, the soldiers' mental support would be there. This way, they could win this battle. With 200,000 against nearly 600,000 enemies, even if Yang Chundong had firearms in hand, he couldn't have the slightest carelessness. He was no longer a rookie on the battlefield. On the contrary, as the god of war who had lived 2 lives, he knew very well that once the army's morale collapsed, they would be defeated like a landslide. When that time came, even the most powerful firearms in one's hands would be useless. Countless history had proven that the decisive factor on the battlefield was not whose weapon was more powerful. In the end, it still depended on the person holding the weapon. Otherwise, there would not have been a victory against the MNC, and there would not have been the birth and emergence of a new Z country. The bigger the battle, the more important morale was. In order to boost morale, Yang Chundong rode on the white dragon with a golden cloak draped over his body. At this time, he stood in the middle of the army like a god descending from the heavens. When his eyes casually swept across the troops in his camp, the soldiers in his line of sight all straightened their bodies and held their heads high. They wanted to show their best side to their king. They wanted to use practical actions to prove that they were the best. When the flag was raised, the soldiers of the 5-star army saw it clearly. As the enemy, the soldiers of the Golden Horde also saw it clearly. Mahama and the others on the city gate tower also saw it clearly. Ha ha ha. Are they trying to show their determination? If so, who doesn't know how to do it? Men, raise the Khan flag. Mahama said, not to be outdone. He also wanted to show his determination. In terms of courage, he was not inferior to anyone. Because the blood of the Golden Horde flowed in his body, he was the noblest existence. After receiving the order, a Khan flag with the totem of a wolf's head was raised on the city wall. This scene was seen by even more soldiers of the Golden Horde. Immediately, a loud roar rose into the sky. Kill, kill, kill. The sound of killing shook the sky. This was also a sign that the war was about to begin. It could be imagined that soon, this place would become a purgatory on earth. Soon, rivers of blood would flow. Hey look, what's that? Because of the appearance of the Khan flag, the morale of the soldiers of the Golden Horde was extremely high. Suddenly, one white after another appeared in the sky in their line of sight. After that, the white dot seemed to be slowly approaching them. The Mongolian cavalry had never seen or even heard of hot air balloons. When they saw the air force of the 5-star army for the first time, they were puzzled, confused, and then excited. The Mongolians believed in Tungri, just like the Han people believed in Buddhism. In their hearts, Tungri was undoubtedly the most sacred existence. Every person in power would use this belief to invite the great shaman to perform a ritual to prove that they were chosen by Tungri. Only then could they win the hearts of the people and obtain power. But all of this was just empty talk from the great shaman. As for what the real Tungri was like, no one knew. Everyone only had a rough idea in their hearts. Tungri had the word Tian in its name, so it should be high up in the sky. Now, The appearance of the hot air balloons was like the manifestation of Tengri's spirit. It gave people a feeling of unattainable height, as if a miracle had appeared. Heavens, it must be Tengri's spirit. There were devout believers in the crowd. When they saw the white getting closer and closer to them, they could not help but dismount from their horses and kneel on the ground, kowtowing 3 times and kowtowing 9 times. With someone leading the charge, more and more Mongolian cavaliers began to imitate him. They knelt on the ground and shouted, "Long live Tengri!" At the same time, they also voiced out the thoughts that they had thought about many times in their hearts, hoping that they could use this chance to make it come true. On the city gate tower, Mahama also saw this scene. Compared to the people below, his mind was much clearer. He knew that the so-called Tengri was the belief of the people above, and it did not really exist. Otherwise, why hadn't any of his ancestors seen it before? Why had they not even heard of it? He knew that this was not Tengri, but seeing that the soldiers had chosen to believe, he decided to use this to his advantage. He quickly made a decision and knelt on the ground. At the same time, he shouted, "Thank you, Tengri, for coming to support us." He saw the shamelessness of the Han people and came to help us. Using the power of belief, he had successfully gathered the hearts of the people. With this shout, everyone was enlightened. So Tengri's spirit is here to help us. Ha ha ha, since that's the case, what is there to be afraid of? We will definitely win this battle. More and more people knelt on the ground with a devout expression. Even Erhi and the others who were dissatisfied with Mahama also knelt on the ground. There was another voice in their hearts. Could it be that the people of the Golden Family were really the children of Tengri? If that was the case, wouldn't betraying Mahama be the same as betraying Tengri? Did I do something wrong? The appearance of the hot air balloons caused a trace of chaos on the originally tense battlefield. It also diluted the killing intent. Everyone's eyes were focused on the direction of the hot air balloons. Even the 100,000 Ming soldiers who had just surrendered were getting restless at this moment. Chapter 1452. Naturally, they believed in the existence of Tengri. Now that they saw that Mahama had attracted the help of Tengri, their thoughts of helping the Han people in the war began to waver. Some people had even reached out to grab their cavalry swords and began to search for the Han army. They looked as if they would draw their swords at any time. Tell them that Tengri is here to help the Heavenly Khan. If they don't believe it, things will become clear soon. Yang Chenong noticed the change in the atmosphere of the army and ordered Shibi. At the same time, he said to Tianyu, who was standing at the side, "Commander Tian, send a message to your soldiers. In a while, when Second Yang fires the cannons, they must also throw down explosives on the city gate tower to prove that Longevity Heaven has abandoned Mahama, the spokesperson of the Huang clan." There were many ways to defeat the enemy, and one of them was to destroy the opponent's will. This way, such an opponent would be vulnerable and difficult to deal with. After the order was given, the two commanders immediately went to work. The chaotic aura in the army was temporarily suppressed. In the end, who was right would depend on the final choice of the white dots. In front of the artillery base, 200 field cannons were ready to fire. 8 mortars were also placed on the ground. Beta Persei led everyone to do a final inspection. "Second brother, you must be tired after a busy night. Why don't you take a seat and rest for a while?" Lin Luan looked at Beta Persei with a bitter face. Although he was begging, he was actually asking for his boss's opinion in his heart. They had agreed last night that the night battle would be handed over to Beta Persei, and he would command the battle during the day. But who would have thought that the other party would be so shameless as to snatch the command during the day? What was the use of him as the artillery commander? Yang Er didn't even turn his head as he carefully inspected the last mortar. When he didn't find any problems, he said, "Captain Lin, I know you have something to say, but this is an order from the young master. I don't dare to disobey it." Seeing that Beta Persei had even brought up Yang Chendong, what else could Lin Luan say? Even if he had 1,000 things to say, he could only hold it in. Seeing that Lin Luan was no longer speaking, Beta Persei knew that he was still angry, but he couldn't vent it out. Thinking that it wouldn't be good to dispel Lin Luan's enthusiasm, he thought for a while and said, "How about this? A total of 208 cannons. Each of us will command half of them. In the end, we'll see who has more glorious results. How about that? Although he couldn't command all of them, getting half of them was already a pretty good result. Lin Luan agreed after a brief consideration. That's good. In a while, when we bombard New Sarai City, we'll each fire a shot first. Let's see whose shot is more accurate. Sure. Beta Persei nodded in agreement. He then looked at the position where the Khan flag was standing with his binoculars and began to adjust the scale of the mortar. Lin Luan did the same on the side, stretching out his thumb to measure the direction. From time to time, he would take a closer look with his binoculars to ensure the accuracy of the target. Whether it was Beta Persei or Lin Luan, they were both quietly working at this time. They didn't even look at the hot air balloon that appeared in the sky. For them, this thing was no longer rare. Both of them had even ridden in it before. Now, what they needed to do was to prepare for the bombardment to ensure that the first shot would be a success. Under their countless checks, the hot air balloon moved with the wind, getting closer and closer to the city walls of New Sarai City. When it finally floated above them, it began to descend. Gradually, they passed through the clouds and revealed their true bodies. When more small black dots appeared above the white dots, the true appearance of the hot air balloon began to be revealed. The Mongolians stared at the top of their heads intently, trying to see what Tengri looked like. Putting down his binoculars, Yang Chendong, who had seen everything, took a deep breath, then said in a firm and powerful voice, "The time is right. Order the artillery to fire." Fire. The signaller next to him immediately lowered the small red flag in his hand. The artillery signaller, who had been watching this scene for a long time, immediately shouted, "Fire, fire." Okay. Almost at the same time, Beta Persei and Commander Lin Luan both agreed. Then, the two men's resolute voices sounded at the same time, "Fire." Boom, boom. Almost at the same time, two shells were loaded into the barrel of the cannon. Then, there were two roaring explosions. The two shells pierced through the sky and went straight to the place where the Khan flag of New Sarai City was located. At the same time, the roaring sound pulled the minds of some people who were looking up at the sky back to reality. Before they could figure out what was going on, a deafening explosion came from the top of New Sarai's city tower. Then, a ball of fire flashed, and two large craters appeared on top of the city tower, along with a group of nobles who had been hit by the cannons. Under the precise adjustment, the two shells hit the vicinity of the Khan flag, and the one fired by Beta Persei fell directly 3 meters away from Mahama. The powerful artillery directly sent him flying, and in the process of flying, Mahama fainted with blood all over his body. Mahama was killed by the explosion. This scene was seen by many soldiers on the battlefield. For a moment, many people burst into tears. Most of them were frightened. They didn't understand. Didn't Tengri appear? Then why couldn't they protect their Khan? Throw the explosive pack. On the hot air balloon, Division Commander Sun Lixing, who had more or less felt the residual power of the artillery, immediately ordered. Then, the explosive pack fell to the ground. At this time, there weren't many important targets on the tower, but the effect of the explosive pack was still incomparable to that of the artillery. This proved that Tengri had given up on Mahama, which also meant that they had indirectly given up on everyone. This psychological blow was the most important. It hit Beta Persei and Lin Luan, who were holding the binoculars at the same time, couldn't help but shout. Then, after looking at each other, they ordered the artillery to fire at the same time, launching a large-scale attack. Boom, 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 boom. On the battlefield, the dense sound of artillery fire came one after another, and when it landed in the Mongolian army's camp, dozens or even dozens of corpses would be sent flying. Under the simultaneous fire of thousands of artillery, the artillery soldiers displayed their great power of killing people like killing chickens. Mahama's death, the artillery's whereabouts, and the continuous attacks, the Mongolian cavalry panicked. They even forgot to charge and just rode on their horses with a confused and fearful expression, not knowing what to do. On the tower, Bola, who was in the cavalry camp, also saw this scene. His face was incomparably pale in an instant, and his body trembled uncontrollably. This trembling was both fear, nervousness, and excitement. Now that Mahama was dead, as the prince, Wouldn't he be the new Khan? Although it came a little too suddenly, wasn't this the result he had been waiting for many years? How could Bola not be excited when he thought about how he was going to be the Khan? The continuous sound of artillery fire quickly pulled him back to reality from his excitement. Phew. Bola let out a long breath and looked deeply at the Han army camp a few miles away. He muttered to himself, "Although you helped me become the Khan earlier, I will not be grateful to you. On the contrary, I will use your blood, your lives, as a stepping stone. I will tell everyone that I am more suitable to lead you than Father Khan. Men, order the army to attack. Summon Shamask and Maulahong, the two leaders, over." Bola, who had gradually calmed down, knew what he had to do next, and he was already prepared for it. Shamask was the leader of the Circassian people, and Maulahong was the leader of the Alan people. In the past, they were independent forces. This time, the dead Mahama had paid a lot of money to deal with the Han army. But now that Mahama was dead, he didn't know if the promise was still valid. After hearing Bola's summons, the two generals came to the central tent with nervous hearts. As soon as they saw each other, the two leaders put their right hands on their chests and bowed. They said with a sorrowful tone, "Your Highness, please restrain your grief. Thank you for your concern, uncles." Bola also pretended to be in pain and bowed. Then he slowly got up and said to the two, "Just now, this little prince has inherited the Khan's position. I am now the new Khan of the Golden Horde." Shamask and Maulahong took the opportunity to look at each other. After a short exchange of glances, they said in unison, "We pay our respects to the great Khan. Uncles, please get up." Bola made a gesture of getting up, as if he was courteous to the wise. Then he sighed and said, "It's a pity that my father's body hasn't even turned cold, and now this Khan has to face the life and death of his people. The pressure is too great. Fortunately, with the help of uncles, this Khan has more confidence to fight to the death with the Han army." With that, the two were pulled onto the war chariot. After saying this, Bola quickly noticed that the expressions of the two leaders had turned somewhat ugly. He knew what they were worried about, and in order to prevent the situation from worsening, he spoke again. "Uncles, please don't worry. Father's promise to you will still be fulfilled. Not only that, I am willing to share the spoils of war with you two uncles. How about we each get 50%? Sigh. I'm sure you two uncles can see that once the Golden Horde loses to the Han army, they will soon make a move on you. To be honest, helping me now is helping yourselves." Threats and promises, Bola had said everything he needed to say. His gaze then fell on Shamask and Salamander. He believed they would make the right choice. Chapter 1453. If Bola had said these words before the battle, the two of them might have considered it. But after seeing the power of the enemy's cannons, they treated the Han army as their greatest enemy. None of them had the confidence to win against such an opponent. Only if the three of them worked together would they have a higher chance of winning. They already had this intention, and now that Bola had offered to split the spoils, how could the two not agree? They immediately cupped their fists and said, "Good. If that's the case, then we will follow the great Khan to destroy the Han army and show the might of the Mongolian army." Haha, good. With the help of the two uncles, we will definitely win this battle. Even though the answer was within his expectations, Bola was still very excited after hearing it with his own ears. The three of them finally sat down together and began to attack together for a common goal. The three of them discussed the direction of their attack and said goodbye to each other before returning to their respective camps. Of course, at this time, the great Khan and the two leaders had already changed into the battle robes of ordinary soldiers. With Mahama's example, they wouldn't casually expose their targets. At the same time, the Mongolian cavalry of the Golden Horde had already launched continuous attacks. Even though it was only a small-scale charge, Yang Chendong did not underestimate the enemy. He ordered the army to be prepared and only used the cannons to receive the enemy's attacks. At the same time, he was also waiting for the enemy's reaction. There were only two kinds of reactions. The first was to fight, and the second was to flee. If it was the latter, Yang Chendong would have a headache. After all, this place was vast. If the main force of the Mongolian army escaped, it would not be easy to catch them again. On the other hand, If they were to fight, it would be an extremely stressful situation for them to have more than 500,000 against his 200,000. Sixth young master, look, they're moving. The cavalry is pressing forward. Qiu Vi, the leader of the Black Cavalry, had always been sharp. He immediately noticed the change in the enemy's formation and immediately shouted. Yang Qindong's eyes were deep as he looked forward. The white dragon under him seemed to sense his master's anxiety and began to snort. Sixth young master, should we order the cavalry to launch a countercharge? Seeing that the enemy's cavalry was getting closer and closer to them, and there seemed to be an endless number of them, the Saber Battalion commander felt the pressure and asked for instructions from the side. Yang Qindong remained silent. He was still waiting. In this battle, Yang Qindong relied on the strength of his firearms. If he were to compete in numbers, he would soon be at a disadvantage. Even if he could win in the later stages, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. This was not what Yang Qindong wanted. Seeing that Yang Qindong didn't say anything, Shi Bi and the others had no choice but to stand to the side and wait. At the same time, they anxiously watched the battlefield. In the face of a cavalry charge, the one who made the first move would usually have the upper hand. After all, a warhorse would need a period of time to exert its advantage. If it waited for the enemy to arrive in front of it before launching a counterattack, it would already be at a disadvantage. The Central Army was not in a hurry and did not issue any orders. Many of the cavalry generals had anxious looks on their faces. However, only the 2nd Cold Front Division and the officers and soldiers had excited looks on their faces. Considering that their shooting range was limited, if the cavalry charged, it would mean that they had nothing to do. No matter how capable they would not be able to display their abilities. However, they were facing cavalry. The enemy's speed was very fast. If they were not careful, they would lose their advantage when the enemy reached them. Therefore, not every commander could remain calm in the face of danger and unfavorable situations that might occur. Yang Qindong was undoubtedly an excellent commander, so he believed in the battle of the Cold Front Division. He believed that the soldiers could use their powerful firearms to suppress the enemy's charge. Since the 6th young master believed in him so much, Xiao Feng had no reason not to perform well. Everyone, check your guns one last time. Listen to my orders. If the enemy enters the range of 500 meters, fire back. Don't save your bullets for me. Fight with all your might. Whoever dares to place the enemy in front of us, I'll punish them when I return. Just wait for them to retire from active duty after this battle. Xiao Feng looked at the countless Mongolian cavaliers who were getting closer and closer, and his eyes were a little red as he shouted. The importance of this battle was self-evident. He was afraid that the soldiers below would become arrogant. At this moment, Xiao Feng had no choice but to give them a warning and show them respect. The threat of retirement was enough to shock all the soldiers. After all, the treatment of the Cold Front Division was very good. No one in the 5-star army could compare to it. Whether it was the benefits or social status, who knew how many people were envious of them? If they were kicked out because of this, they would not have the face to see anyone. Xiao Feng was ruthless, and the officers and soldiers below all became very serious. Many of them obediently checked the guns in their hands and the 8 basic ammunition beside them. Then, they held their breaths and stared at the front. They were silently calculating whether the distance between them and the enemy was within their shooting range. The cannons were still firing, and they did not fall into the Mongolian army in a fixed direction. However, the effectiveness of 208 cannons against over 500,000 cavalrymen was limited. Even though Beta Persei and Lin Luan had continuously ordered people to pour water on the cannons to cool them down, the temperature of the cannons was still high. Damn it! Beta Persei cursed as he looked at the enemy cavalry that was getting closer and closer to the cannons. He originally thought that with the advantage of the cannons, no matter how strong the Mongolian cavalry was, they would be defeated in an instant. However, who would have thought that they would start a countercharge and completely ignore the cannons? Men, go and raise the cannons. Don't stop. Continue firing. I don't believe that these people are not afraid of death. Knowing that the cannons could not change the entire situation, Beta Persei also gave up on the idea of using the cannons to defend against the enemy. He decided to calm down and do a good job of commanding the cannons to create more conditions for the army to counterattack. The cannons were already helpless. This was because the enemy was too close, and the process of firing the cannons required a lot of time. In comparison, the firearms did not have such a problem. With the light and heavy machine guns and the Type 95 that could fire in bursts and bursts, they were only afraid that the enemy's numbers were too small. All the soldiers of the cold front looked forward excitedly, waiting for the enemy to come closer. However, the Mongolian cavalry was getting closer and closer to them. 2 miles, 1.5 miles. Finally, they were within 1 mile of the enemy. The Mongolian cavalry that came in a straight line took up the entire battlefield. As far as the eye could see, there were enemies everywhere. In such an environment, the soldiers of the cold front did not even need to aim. They only needed to fire their bullets, and they would hit an enemy. Fire! When they saw that the Mongolian cavaliers were within their firing range, Xiao Feng, who had been waiting for a long time, could not help but shout out the order to open fire. Thousands of long spears were fired at the same time, and they fired at the Mongolian cavaliers who were charging over to vent their anger. Following the sound of gunfire, row after row of Mongolian cavalrymen fell from their horses or fell to the ground with their horses. The bullets pierced through the air and drilled into the bodies of the cavalry and war horses. At the same time, they also took the lives of the cavalry. At that moment, life was so fragile. At that moment, life was as cheap as grass. At that moment, life was flowing away like water. Under the sound of gunfire, the Mongolian cavalry's charge was stopped. The Mongolian cavalry that charged at the front fell like chives that were being cut. Then, they were replaced by another batch. The only difference was that the ground was covered with a layer of corpses, and there was a pungent smell of blood. Phew! When the mercenary commander and the others saw this scene, they all heaved a sigh of relief. Just now, they were really worried. If the cold front could not stop these cavalry, the consequences would be unimaginable. Once the enemy cavalry reached them, even if the king's flag was here, the army would not be able to escape. In this kind of battle, once the morale was gone, once they started to retreat, no one would be able to turn the situation around. Just now, the mercenary commander had even made the decision to protect Yangqindong and retreat. Fortunately, the worst-case scenario did not happen. The cold front was indeed the most elite of the 5-star corps. They did not disappoint and finally blocked the enemy's attack. They suppressed the enemy's arrogant aura and suppressed the enemy's arrogant flames. The 5-star flag was still there, and it calmed the hearts of the soldiers. It allowed them to not choose to escape when the danger was near. Now that the cold front's counterattack had stopped the enemy's attack and was continuously destroying the enemy's strength, all the soldiers of the 5-star army relaxed. Then, they stared at the battlefield without blinking. At the same time, they would occasionally look at the king's flag and wait for the order to counterattack. The soldiers of the 5-star army relaxed, and in return, the expressions of the Mongol cavalry changed drastically. They were in great pain. Originally, they thought that with their advantage in numbers, they would not be afraid even if the Han army had cannons. After all, cannons could only attack a single point and needed time to reload. If they were lucky, they would not be hit by the cannons. As long as they could charge in front of the Han army, they would be able to display the advantage of their cavalry. They would wave their sabers and let the Han army know what the consequences of angering them were. This was especially so when the cavalry continued to charge. As the distance between them and the Han army got closer and closer, the Mongol cavalry became even more excited. Many of them even thought that victory was already in their hands. That was because with such a close distance and the advantage in numbers, the Han army would definitely not be able to turn the situation around. Because of this, many of the Mongol cavalry increased the speed of their horses. It was as if they were afraid that they would be a step too late and not be able to obtain military merits. Among them, there were a few small Mongol tribes that had been persuaded by General Gray. Chapter 1454. They had met with Gray before and agreed to help the 5-star army. However, seeing the situation on the battlefield change, seeing that the Han army was about to be finished, how could they still care about such things? This was the human heart. Never expect promises to be useful, and never take agreements too seriously. When you are weak, even a dog may come and trample on you. Of course, not everyone was like this. Take Erhek, for example. He led his tribe behind. Since he had agreed to help Gray, he could not go back on his word. More importantly, Erhek did not think that the Han army would be defeated so easily. If that was the case, why would he send troops to fight the Golden Horde? With everyone having different thoughts, the three marshals of the Mongol army all had their own thoughts. Shamask, the leader of the Cherkasss people, and Mao Lahong, the leader of the Alans, had the intention of retreating. Under the constant barrage of cannon fire, they were suffering losses. They thought that as long as the cavalry charged into the Han army, they would be able to turn the situation around. Not only would they win, but they would also be able to get their hands on the powerful cannons. But who would have thought that in addition to the power of the cannons, the other party's muskets were also so powerful that they were able to stop the cavalry's charge? It was as if a natural dividing line had been drawn, and whoever crossed it would die. He watched as his subordinates charged forward and died one by one, and two by two died. In a short period of time, tens of thousands of cavalry died in the charge. Shamask and Mao Lahong's expressions changed. They began to feel fear. Unknown death was the most terrifying thing. Since they didn't know how long the Han muskets could last, Shamask and Mao Lahong didn't know if they should continue gambling. After all, the stakes were too high. If they failed, there would be no chance of a comeback. Shamask and Mao Lahong's expressions changed. Kagan Bola sneered and said, "Uncles, we have no way out now. You all participated in the operation against the Han army. Do you think that if the Golden Horde loses, they will let you go?" Shamask and Mao Lahong frowned. They did not know how to answer. Seeing that the time had come, Bolal said urgently, "All right, there are some things that can't be undone. It's still the same words, life and death is right in front of us. If we can't defeat the Han army, then our decades of hard work and effort will go to waste. Now is not the time to care about losses. Only by continuing to charge can we hope for victory. But if we hesitate, we will die without a grave." Besides, he had never heard of a gun that could fire continuously without stopping. Charge, there is no other choice. Yes, there is no other choice. When Mao Lahong heard this, he seemed to have made up his mind. He looked at Shamask and even spoke to console him. 2 against 1. Although Shamask's heart ached at the losses he had suffered on the battlefield, at this point, even if he retreated, he wouldn't have a good ending. He wouldn't even have a chance to fight for a second chance. Fine. Let's keep charging. I want to see how long these Han muskets can keep firing. On the battlefield, the Mongol army was coming to an agreement. Young Qindong, who was riding on the white dragon, sighed as he looked at the scenes unfolding before him. What a natural place for a decisive battle. Looking at the empty space in front of New Sarai that could hold hundreds of thousands of troops from both sides, Yang Qindong couldn't help but sigh at how much effort the Golden Horde had put into setting up such a natural battlefield. But this battlefield, which was meant to be used against the 5-star army, was destined to become their graveyard. The gunfire continued. The Mongolian cavalry continued to lose men, but their momentum did not decrease. In fact, they even increased their power. If it weren't for the fact that the 2nd Division of the Cold Front Division had used their rocket launchers to dispel the enemy's momentum time and time again, the enemy would have already reached them by now. This was the bravery of the Mongol cavalry. They were fearless in the face of death. Even though Bola and the other 2 leaders had sent out a large number of warlords, the Golden Horde's control over the hearts of the people over the past 200 years had been very effective. At the very least, if it was the Qing army in the late Qing dynasty, they would not have had the courage and ability to face the 8-nation alliance. This was enough to show that the Golden Horde's strength was still at its peak. According to history, they still had a few decades to fight with the Rossi principalities. But so what? In front of the 5-star army, no matter how strong the army was, it was nothing more than a useless army. Everything depended on whether Yang Qindong was determined to deal with them. It depended on whether their existence was an obstacle to the unification of the world. It's about time. We can't kill everyone. We need a lot of slaves to build this place. Order the Air Force to follow the plan. Yang Qindong, who was on the White Dragon, moved his lips slightly. The commander of the Heavenly Language Corps, who had been standing at the side impatiently for a long time, immediately agreed happily. Then, He ran to the communications center and began to contact Division Commander Sunlixing. In the sky above New Sarai City, the hot air balloons that first appeared here rose higher and higher as the battle began. They slowly left the people's sight. However, they did not really leave. Instead, they hid themselves and waited for an opportunity. They were waiting for the order to attack. Finally, after about 2 hours, Division Commander Sunlixing, who was on a hot air balloon, received the order from Commander Tianyu. The moment he saw the contents of the telegram, he was very excited. He immediately said to the flag bearer beside him, "Raise the flag, order the operation to begin." The Air Force soldiers who had been waiting impatiently in the air were waiting for this order. After seeing the command from the hot air balloon, they excitedly lowered the altitude of the hot air balloon left and right, constantly searching for the target in the process. In order to cooperate with them, dozens of intelligence team members in New Sarai City had already begun to move. They were wearing brightly colored silk cloths, which they tied to the sides of their important targets to guide the hot air balloons in the sky. What were important targets? When two armies fought, before the soldiers and horses moved, the provisions would move first. The most important thing was, of course, food. As long as the army's provisions were destroyed, the soldiers would have no food. How could they continue the battle? They would definitely lose their minds and their morale would plummet. The Five-Star Army's Air Force had chosen such a target. For this battle, the Golden Horde had indeed stockpiled a lot of food in the city. It was originally to guard against the Ross Duchy, but now it had come in handy. There are so many targets. Sigh, there is a lot of food among them. It would be a pity if they were all destroyed. Sunlixing sat in the hot air balloon and held a telescope. He looked down from above and then shook his head. His face was filled with reluctance. "Division Master, give the order. The soldiers can't wait any longer." A messenger beside him, who was also a thrower, urged in a low voice. He had already chosen his target. He only needed to descend to a certain height before he threw the bag of explosives in his hand. "Okay. Order each company to find the nearest target and attack randomly." Sunlixing nodded. This was not the time to be merciful. War was like this. Most of the time, if you didn't kill others, others would kill you. There was always a result. Often, before such a result appeared, there would be endless killing. On the other hand, only by killing one side could the war stop and allow the people to live a peaceful life again. Therefore, in a sense, being able to end the battle quickly was also a good thing. Sunlixing dismissed the messy thoughts in his mind and began to focus on completing the mission. About half an hour later, the hot air balloon descended to a height where it could throw the bags of explosives. Then, one by one, the bags of explosives fell from the sky. New Sarai City was engulfed in flames. The sudden explosion and the sound of thunder turned the city, which was the rear, into the front line. Countless houses and mansions of the nobles of the Golden Horde became the targets of the explosion. Countless heavily guarded granaries became the focus of the explosion. Amidst the sound of thunder, the sky was filled with flames. What's going on? The new Khanbora, who was commanding the cavalry to charge outside the city, suddenly heard the continuous explosions behind him. He looked back with an ugly expression. The thing he was most worried about had happened. Instability in the rear was a military taboo. This would create a huge pressure on the already low morale of the army. It could even decide the outcome of this battle. "Great Khan, I will go take a look." Captain Meng Wuka looked back, his eyes flashing with horror. He was also very curious as to why there were cannons raining down from the rear, with flames soaring into the sky. "Hence," he asked, "go quickly and return quickly." Bora nodded to Meng Wuka, then said, "Arrange for General Bwadwa, who is in charge of the scouts, to come here. I want to know if there are any more ambushes nearby." Meng Wuka nodded and left. Not long after, he entered the city. What he saw was a scene of fire everywhere. Everywhere, the people in the city were rushing to put out the fire. However, compared to the limited fire suppression, there were still bags of explosives falling from the sky, causing new damage and spreading flames. In comparison, the fire did not seem to be weak. Instead, it seemed to be getting out of control. "That's where the granaries are, and there too. Heavens!" Meng Wuka quickly looked around and was shocked. At this moment, he finally realized the seriousness of the matter. Almost all the granaries in sight were on fire. This was shaking the foundation of the Golden Horde. Chapter 1455. Quickly arrange for people to put out the fire. As he shouted, Mangwok turned around and galloped away. He wanted to tell the Khan about what had happened here so that he could make preparations. Just as Mangwok galloped towards the city, Yang Chendong, who was riding on the White Dragon, saw the flames in New Salai City. He knew that the Air Force had made a move. He knew that the plan to take drastic measures to deal with the situation had finally come to fruition. It's time to end this. Tell General Gray that he can start his plan. Yang Chendong's gaze was still calm as he spoke in a calm voice. The Black Cavalry had already received the order and spread the word. General Gray, who had been waiting in the army for a long time, also saw the flames in New Salai City. He became nervous and excited because his chance to make a great contribution had arrived. However, he was still faintly worried in his heart. He didn't know if Yang Chendong would give him this chance to make a contribution. Looking at the current situation, even without Air, he and the others, the 5-star army would definitely win this battle. Originally, he thought that this battle would be very difficult. At that time, the tens of thousands of people that he had prepared in advance would be able to play a role in determining the outcome of the battle. However, from the looks of it, his arrangements had become useless. At this moment, Gray wasn't sure if Yang Chendong would still use the backup plan that he had arranged. Just as he was feeling nervous, Yang Chendong sent a messenger in front of him and announced the military order, asking him to immediately attack according to the plan.
Yes.
Gray excitedly saluted with a military salute that he had just learned not long ago. After watching the Black Cavalry leave, he laughed loudly and said, "Good, good. It's time for this general to show his talent. Men, take out the red silk cloth and send the signal." The red silk cloth was the signal that Gray, Air, he, and the others had discussed before this. The moment the red cloth appeared on the battlefield, the leaders of the small Mongol tribes that had been convinced by him would immediately change sides and deal a heavy blow to the Mongol army. The red cloth had already been prepared, and the soldiers who received the order immediately raised it up high. The long pole in their hands stood between heaven and earth, and at this moment, it fluttered with the wind. Because the red cloth was dozens of meters wide, it became a scenery on the battlefield that couldn't be ignored. At this time, Air, he, and the others were anxiously looking in the direction of the Han army camp. In just 4 hours, they had personally witnessed batch after batch of elite Mongol cavalry charging at the Han camp and dying on the battlefield. To be honest, they had seen a lot on the battlefield, and they had seen many one-sided situations. However, this was the first time he had seen such a scene where one side had suffered countless casualties while the other side was completely unharmed. Originally, they thought that the Golden Horde had the advantage in numbers. Furthermore, they were well prepared and had even chosen such a good battlefield. The Han army would definitely be at a disadvantage. If that was the case, then he would have to carefully consider what to do next. After all, if the Han army was going to lose, then he would be leading the warriors of his tribe over. That would not be sending charcoal in snowy weather, but rushing to their deaths. He was originally very worried, as he never thought that the Churkas and Allans would appear on the battlefield to help the Golden Horde deal with the Han army. However, he had already promised Gru, and had even accepted his silver. If he were to go back on his word now, wouldn't he become a disloyal and unjust person? As for what to do, ere he was in a difficult position. Even though he saw that the Han army had powerful cannons that he did not know of, he did not see any hope. In the past, when they fought against the White Russians, they had also used cannons. However, in the end, they did not gain any advantage. Furthermore, the Golden Horde had spent a lot of money this time, inviting so many helpers. How long could the Han army last? Once the cavalry charged in front of the cannons, they would no longer have the advantage and would be slaughtered by the Mongol cavalry. Just as he was feeling conflicted, the might of the 5-star army's muskets appeared. They actually formed a strong and dense net, making it impossible for anyone to charge in. Who knew how many elite cavalry had died because of this? When he saw this scene, he finally relaxed a lot. At the same time, he finally saw the strength of the Han army. At the same time, He began to worry that such a strong Han army would not be able to accept him. Humans were often such contradictory entities. When they had no money, they wanted to have money. When they had money, they would worry about not having money. He, who had unknowingly become the emperor of conflict, would occasionally look towards the Han army camp, waiting for General Gray to send him a signal. Unknowingly, a layer of cold sweat had appeared on his forehead. He had already noticed that as time went by, more and more cavalrymen died on the battlefield. Even though he and his tribe had been prepared for this since a long time ago and were at the edge of the battlefield, the recruitment of soldiers had already begun and were heading towards them. It could be seen that in at most an hour, it would be his tribe's turn to send out troops. If that was the case, what would he do? Resist? Facing the Mongol army, which was tens of times his tribe's size, he would definitely not be able to gain an advantage. Attack the five-star army? He was afraid that the other party's gun wouldn't have eyes and would really shoot him to death. What should I do? What should I do? General Gray, what exactly are you thinking? He, who was feeling extremely anxious, focused all of his attention on the Han army camp. He could not care about anything else. He only wanted to take action the moment General Gray sent out the signal. This was also a way to save himself. Finally, amidst his anticipation, the large piece of red cloth that he had been thinking about appeared in the Han army camp. Signal, the signal has finally been sent. Warriors of the tribe, wrap the white cloth around your arms and follow me to kill. He, who had been waiting impatiently for a long time, after confirming that his eyes were not playing tricks on him, how could he continue waiting? He immediately shouted and led the 5,000 warriors from his tribe to charge at the Mongol cavalry around them. At the same time, a few Mongolian cavaliers who also had white cloth on their shoulders raised their sabers and suddenly attacked their allies who were caught off guard and did not have white cloth on their shoulders. The actions of He and the others caused the already low morale of the Mongol army to become even more chaotic, causing their morale to drop to a freezing point. Before many of them could even understand what was going on, their bodies had already been sliced by the sabers, causing them to fall to the ground. The Mongol army became chaotic, and the chaos started from the rear. This scene fell into the eyes of Yang Chendong, who was carefully observing the situation. He could not help but put down his binoculars and laughed. Very good. Even a sturdy fortress is afraid of collapsing from the inside. After sighing, Yang Chendong's right hand grabbed the sharp saber by his waist. With a flick of his wrist, the saber was raised. At the same time, his shout rang out, "Warriors, the Mongol army's rations have already been destroyed by our air force. Now that they have started to fight amongst themselves, it is time for us to retaliate. This king gives the order, charge, charge." The 1,000-plus black cavalry soldiers in charge of protecting Yang Chendong roared out in unison after hearing their master's command. They repeated every word Yang Chendong had said, trying their best to transmit his voice into the ears of every soldier. After the final word, the new Second Army, who had already mounted their war horses and had been waiting for a long time, charged forward under the lead of Commander Soter. Following closely behind were the 20,000 Mongol soldiers led by Ahuli. After these cavalry soldiers covered the sky and covered the earth, the 100,000 Mongol soldiers that had just surrendered charged towards the Mongol army under the lead of Gray, Baru, Wu Tuo, and the other generals. The retaliation had begun. Over 100,000 cavalry soldiers moved together. How could this scene be described with just one word? It was rather grand and spectacular. Even the 2nd Division of the Cold Front, who were lying prone on the ground, felt the earth tremble. As the division commander, Xiaofeng didn't need to turn his head to know what was going on. He couldn't help but reveal an anxious expression. In the past 2 hours, he had led the 2nd Division to fight to his heart's content. Although they had been shooting nonstop for a long period of time, many soldiers had become quite tired. There were even a few soldiers who had suffered light injuries due to their poor control. However, Xiaofeng and the soldiers didn't complain about their tiredness. Seeing the Mongol cavalry fall one by one under the muzzle of their guns, they felt both pain and joy. If they continued fighting like this, Xiaofeng could even boast that there wouldn't be any problems leaving these enemies to the soldiers of the 2nd Division. However, at this moment, the cavalry soldiers of the Cold Front had begun their charge. This also meant that his thoughts of taking all the credit for himself had been shattered. He had already thought that it was impossible to leave these enemies to the second division. After all, the sixth young master didn't just want to defeat the enemy. He also wanted to obtain this place and construct it. Once all the strong men died in battle, who knew how many years it would take to redevelop this place? However, even if he knew all this, the moment he saw the cavalry charge, Xiao Feng still felt a deep sense of loss in his heart. He knew better than anyone that once the cavalry charged, the cold front soldiers wouldn't be able to do anything. When both sides were fighting, the cold front soldiers didn't dare to fire casually. What if they hurt their comrades? Furthermore, the cavalry was running. It would be strange if they could keep up. He knew that he didn't have many chances left. Xiao Feng's heart skipped a beat. He simply got up from the ground and started shooting with the light machine gun in his hand, while taking large strides forward. Kill, all of you. Die. Xiao Feng, who was holding the light machine gun, made use of every second to initiate an attack. He fired towards the Mongol cavalry. Chapter 1456. Seeing how their division commander was acting, the soldiers all followed suit. One by one, they stood up and raised their spears. Some of them even jogged forward in order to kill a few more enemies before the cavalry arrived. The musketeers actually charged back, causing the Mongol cavalry who were charging forward to be stunned. Shouldn't they be defending? Why did they charge forward? Also, what was with the black mass of cavalry behind the musketeers? What was with the battle cries coming from behind them? What did the smoke and fire in the city mean? At that moment, it was not an exaggeration to say that they were surrounded on all sides. The gunshots continued, and one after another, the Mongol cavalry fell from their horses. They could not even get within 300 steps of the cold vanguard soldiers before they were hit by bullets that came out of nowhere. When more and more Mongol cavalry fell to the ground like dumplings, fear started to spread through the Mongol cavalry camp. One had to be prepared to die on the battlefield, but one had to know how to die. If they could win, they would be able to gain merit by fighting. Everyone wanted to charge forward, and maybe this was how they would fight for their lives in the future. But when they knew that they would definitely die if they charged forward, who would be willing to die? When a warrior who was proficient in archery and horse riding did not even have the chance to raise his saber, he did not even have the chance to charge forward and fight. Who would be willing to throw away his life in vain when he knew that he would die? Under the gunshots, the Mongol cavalry's morale plummeted. At the same time, many of them stopped in their tracks. They were all considering whether it was worth it to charge forward and feed themselves to the musketeers. At this moment, the cavalry of the new Second Army had already charged to the side of the cold vanguard warriors. They quickly passed by them, and each of them held a sharp sword as they charged forward. Their target was the Mongol cavalry who were hesitating, retreating, and whose morale had plummeted. Your grain has already been destroyed, and your Khan has been killed by the cannons. What's the point of your resistance? Those who surrender will live, and those who resist will die. While launching an attack, he did not forget to shout loudly to persuade them to surrender. Shirbi knew Yang Qindong's strategy very well, and he also knew the significance of these strong Mongolian cavaliers to the construction of this place in the future. With the thought of not killing them if he could capture them alive, before the new Second Army led by Shirbi arrived, his shouts had already reached them. The Mongolian cavalry did not have the heart to fight back. When they heard the shouts in Mongolian and saw the chaotic scene behind them and the fireworks in New Salai City, a warrior finally could not stand the pressure and threw the scimitar in his hand to the ground. He also jumped down from his warhorse. "Don't kill me, I surrender. Don't kill us, we surrender." After the first, there was a second, a third, and then a third. Then, there was the scene of the cavalrymen dismounting and surrendering. There were not only cavalry from the Golden Horde, but also from the Sherkas and Allans. Seeing that the general situation was about to change, they were forced to abandon their sabers and surrender. In front of absolute strength, resistance was useless. The most important thing was to think of a way to survive. The Five-Star Army's cavalry charged into the Mongolian cavalry like a whirlwind. Following their arrival, the cavalrymen dismounted and surrendered. Of course, there were also some who refused to surrender. However, whenever they met such people, the new Second Army soldiers would not hesitate to cut them down. At this moment, they did not have the time to do any psychological work with the enemy. If they surrendered, they would live. If they did not surrender, they would die. Their morale was greatly boosted. The new Second Army soldiers, who had long wanted to show off, had high morale. They charged into the enemy like a dragon entering the ocean. Wherever they went, they would either surrender or die. Wherever they went, they did not look at any of the cavalrymen on their war horses. For a long time, the new Second Army had been labeled as a rebel army. Although they had gone through an investigation and Yang Chundong had even said that the new Second Army was a good army with no problems, it was still not a good army. However, it was inevitable that there would be people who would point fingers at them behind their backs. As the commander of the army, Shibi was undoubtedly the one who was under the most pressure. He had wanted to change this situation more than once, but he could not find the right opportunity. Finally, the new Second Army's hesitation on sending troops to the far eastern province attracted Yang Chindong's dissatisfaction. This also gave the new Second Army a chance. Ever since they knew that they were going to follow Yang Chindong into battle, all the commanders of the new Second Army, including Shibi, had been waiting for a chance to avenge themselves. Finally, along the way, the new Second Army had shown enough strength to prove that they were brave warriors. At the same time, they also received another promise from Yang Chindong. After the Golden Horde and the Rossi Principalities were destroyed, the new Second Army would become the new Second Army, just like the new First Army. When they received this news, all the generals and soldiers of the new Second Army, including Shibi, became excited. Everyone knew that the expansion of the army would affect countless benefits. A soldier could be promoted to an officer, an ordinary officer could be promoted to an intermediate officer, and so on. There would be countless benefits. The opportunity to perform meritorious deeds and be rewarded was right in front of them. For this opportunity to come, and also to be able to turn their ideas into reality, the new Second Army had been holding back a lot of energy since the beginning of the war. They wanted to defeat the Golden Horde, then the Rossi Principalities, and make the new Second Army a real army. They wanted to witness this part of history. With such a huge motivation, how could the soldiers not give it their all? Not to mention, the five-star army had completely grasped the initiative on the battlefield. With the right time, the right place, and the right people, the new Second Army attacked. Like a tiger out of its cage, they gave off an unstoppable aura as soon as they entered the battlefield. The new Second Army charged into the battlefield. With high morale and firm ideals, their charging speed was very fast, completely catching the Mongolian army off guard. It didn't take long for them to collide with a patrol team. The patrol team on the battlefield was set up to prevent soldiers from being afraid of death. They had the right to kill anyone who retreated on the battlefield, which was why they were very powerful. However, being powerful didn't mean that they were powerful. They were just relying on their special status, so no one dared to attack them. That was why the army that charged out didn't dare to turn back. This didn't mean that they were stronger than others. In fact, many of them were just average. When such an army collided with the high morale of the new Second Army, the result was predictable. Almost at the moment when the two sides collided, the outcome was already decided. When the patrol team faced the five-star army that dared to attack them, they didn't have any special privileges. All they had was to be cut down. When the raised sabers landed on their bodies and cut into their flesh, causing fresh blood to flow out, the patrol team members realized that they were just ordinary people. They weren't made of iron, and when a saber pierced into their flesh, they would feel pain. They would bleed, and they would die. After a series of collisions, the patrol team's courage was shattered, and their formation was quickly broken. The new Second Army treated them like they were nothing and continued to charge into the middle of the Mongol army that was already in chaos. When the patrol team thought that the danger had passed, Ahuli brought 20,000 White Russians and charged over. Facing the scattered Mongolian patrol team, they didn't show any mercy and didn't intend to let them go. Instead, they charged at them, forcing most of the patrol team members to kneel and beg to surrender. Reality proved that those who didn't want others to surrender would often be the first to surrender. This was what they meant by embezzlement. Just as the 20,000 White Russians took care of the patrol team, the 100,000 Mongolian soldiers charged into the battlefield. When the cavalry saw that there were either corpses or captives kneeling on the ground, they became anxious. The five-star army had prepared great rewards for their contributions. Now that they had fallen behind, how could they be willing to give up? As such, when they passed by the patrol team, they glanced at the 20,000 White Russians and continued to charge forward. Although they were the last to set off, they wanted to charge to the front and be the first to meet the enemy. This was the effect of morale and also the power of capital. When given enough benefits, soldiers would fight with their lives on the line. One was active, while the other was passive, so the effects were naturally different. When the 100,000 soldiers who wanted to contribute charged towards the Mongol army, it was truly a majestic sight, and no one could stop them. Before the 100,000 Mongolian soldiers arrived, Shibi led the new Second Army, while Ahuli led the 20,000 White Russians and charged into the Mongolian army. As they entered, the news of the rations being destroyed in New Sarai City spread like wildfire. We don't even have rations anymore, so why are we still working for them? Why don't we just rebel and follow the Han army? At least we'll have food to eat and won't starve. He and the others were very useful at this moment. Especially when these words were shouted out by a few tribes, it had a huge impact. When some people heard this, they couldn't help but consider whether they would be able to survive if they continued to follow the Golden Horde. In contrast, the Churkas and the Alans did not have such worries. Both sides were in a cooperative relationship, so they didn't have to worry about who belonged to whom. Now that they heard that the rations had been destroyed, they were the first to protest. Chapter 1457. It was agreed upon when they came that the Golden Horde would provide all the food and fodder. If they won the war, they would be rewarded. That was the source of their motivation. But now, even the Golden Horde had no food to eat. What was the point of them staying here? Were they waiting to starve to death? When the resentment started to spread, the cavalry of the two tribes started to retreat. This exposed a huge gap in the front line, allowing the 100,000 Ming cavalry to enter. The Golden Horde's cavalry was already unable to put up any resistance. Many tribes even started to surrender to the Golden Horde. As the newly appointed Great Khan, Bola naturally saw everything that had happened. He hurriedly sent people to find Shamask and Maulahom. He wanted their support and was willing to pay a price for it. Unfortunately, the moment they saw the rations in the city burned and the chaos in the Golden Horde, the two leaders no longer dared to trust Bola. This man clearly did not have the ability to control things like his father, yet he still insisted on fighting the Han army to the death. This clearly showed that he did not know when to stop or when to retreat. How could someone like this be a qualified ally? The two chiefs were worried that if they waited any longer, they would be stuck and would not even have a chance to escape. They did not even bid farewell to Bora before retreating with their army. The departure of the two major tribes, along with over 200,000 of their cavalry, made the Golden Horde's situation even worse. Especially when Great Khan Bola heard this news, he almost fainted. There were hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They had only fought for less than 8 hours, and the outcome had already been decided. This was something that he had never thought would happen. In the face of such a predicament, even if his father, Maha Dahan, was still alive, he would also be helpless. The success of the war was also beyond Yang Qindong's expectations. Originally, he thought that even if he won this battle, it would take at least a few months for the outcome to be decided. This was because the Golden Horde only needed to retreat to New Salam when the battle went south. That would be an additional barrier. Even if the city walls were blasted open by the cannons, who knew how many days the ensuing street battles would take to end? He never thought that things would go so smoothly. First, the cannons killed Mahama, throwing the enemy into chaos. Then, the enemy's morale was shaken, and they gave up waiting for the army to advance at lightning speed, scaring more than 200,000 enemy cavalry into fleeing. In this way, the difference in military strength between the two sides was not that great, and he even had a slight advantage in battle. Since that was the case, this battle was decided. Send people to keep an eye on the two tribes that escaped. I want to know where they are staying and their specific information. Also, stop attacking and use psychological tactics. The Golden Horde may have lost this battle, but they still have their strength. It would be best if we could use them. Yang Chendong quickly issued a number of targeted military orders after learning about the situation. Shamask and the other two tribes left decisively. They didn't say a word to anyone and just left the rest of the Golden Horde's army outside the city. By the time Bola knew that the situation was heading for the worst, he was about to lead his army back into the city when he discovered that the road to the city gates had been blocked. He and several other tribes were gathered in front of the gates, ready to fight to the death. Are they trying to rebel? Bolt roared furiously when he heard Scout General Bodo explain the current situation to his face. He was the current Khan of the Golden Horde. A small tribe like he wouldn't even give them a second glance. But now, they were being suppressed by the enemy. How could he not be angry? Seeing how angry Bola was and how he was about to give the order to charge, Bodo hurriedly tried to dissuade him. Great Khan, you can't. Our army has just encountered an unforeseen event, and our morale is in chaos. This is not the time to start a battle. We should rest, reorganize, and raise morale. Otherwise, this kind of army won't be able to win any battles. Bodo also wanted to say that this kind of army was likely to collapse in a single blow. If that happened, they would have to give up their last chance to turn the tables. How could the fuming Bola not know this? Although he was very angry, he hadn't lost his mind. It was because of this that he didn't give the order to charge. All right, since that's the case, I'll leave this matter to you. Go talk to them and have them open the gates immediately. Let this Khan in, no matter the price. He knew that if he stayed outside the city without any obstacles, he would only be a sitting duck. Only by entering the city and relying on the city's buildings would they be able to fight a battle of attrition. As for the provisions, although a lot of them were burned, there were still some hidden underground in the city. This was probably a case of a crafty rabbit having 3 burrows. No ruler would place all their hopes on one thing or one person. Yes, Bodo had a bitter expression. He knew that the current situation wasn't a good time to negotiate, but since the Khan had given the order, he had no other choice. He could only agree and leave the central tent. After Bodo left, another general named Chiwen walked into the tent. When he saw Bola, he bowed and said, "This general greets the Khan. Uncle, please rise." Bola no longer had his angry expression towards Chiwen. Instead, he spoke with an amiable expression, even taking a step forward and making a gesture of supporting Chiwen. General Chiwen was different from others. He was a member of the clan and one of the fierce generals by his father's side when he was alive. According to seniority, Bola had to call him uncle. Moreover, this person was very good at fighting and was very capable. Because of this, his father was wary of him and suppressed him everywhere. That was why he wasn't very famous. However, this person's ability was obvious to all. At least when it came to war, Bola was definitely not his opponent. Now that they were in a life-and-death situation, Bola couldn't care less about these taboos. Based on the principle of capable people do more work, he had to use Chiwen. Bola's courtesy made Chiwen shed tears of gratitude. Great Khan, please don't call me uncle. In front of you, I'm just an ordinary general. Ah, what are you saying, uncle? We are of the same clan. Even if our bones are broken, our tendons are still connected. Not only are you my uncle now, but you will always be. As long as I, Bola, am the Khan of the Golden Horde, you will always be my uncle. Bo-La's words were spoken with sincerity, and they came from the bottom of his heart. When Chiwen heard this, his eyes turned red, as if he was extremely touched. If that's the case, then I'll thank you. But what business does the Khan have with uncle? Chiwen's ego was so inflated that he would climb up as soon as he was given the chance. Bola was naturally very dissatisfied. In the past, he had his father above him, who had suppressed him for decades. Now, he wanted to be suppressed by an uncle. Of course, these were just thoughts in his heart. This was a critical moment, and internal strife could not be allowed. When dealing with talented people, one should be bold enough to use them and break free first. Thus, Bola cupped his fists and said respectfully, "Uncle, you've seen the current situation. The Sherkas and Allans are short-sighted and have abandoned us. Now that our strength has been greatly reduced, it will be difficult to fight the Han army outside the city. We can only think of a way to return to the city and find another way. But now that the road back to the city has been blocked, what should we do? Isn't that simple? Just kill whoever gets in the way. But rest assured, Great Khan, as long as I lead 50,000 elite cavalry, we will be able to enter the city in the blink of an eye and ensure your safety. Hearing this, Chiwen patted his own chest and spoke with assurance. Oh, do you need 50,000 men? Bowler asked doubtfully when he heard that he wanted the right to lead 50,000 cavalrymen. This, 50,000 is not possible. 30,000 is fine, but they must be elites. It would be best if they are the golden armored cavalry by the Khan's side. Otherwise, we need at least 50,000 people. Chiwen seemed to be afraid that Bola would be unhappy, so he took a step back and said, 30,000 people would be reduced to 50,000, and 20,000 of them would be his golden armored cavalry. This made Bola's eyes reveal a difficult expression. Seeing that he didn't get a definite answer and wasn't rejected, Chiwen knew that there was room for discussion. He immediately said, Great Khan, we can't wait any longer. Now that we have suffered a great defeat, the morale of the army is unstable. If we use ordinary troops, it will take a long time to raise the number of soldiers. Once the Han army completes the encirclement, we won't have the chance to break out. Therefore, I ask Great Khan to make a decision as soon as possible. Chiwen's urging clearly had some effect. When Bola heard it, his hesitant face couldn't help but become more resolute. Recalling that the golden armored cavalry was an existence similar to his imperial guards, he decided to temporarily hand them over to Chiwen. He only needed to give an order, and they would return to his side. In that case, the other party only had 10,000 ordinary cavalry. They wouldn't be able to cause any big waves. After thinking for a while and not seeing any problems, Bola finally said, Fine, since that is the case, I will leave this matter to Uncle. At the very least, we must open the gates tomorrow morning and let the army in. Otherwise, I'm afraid we won't have any chance. Don't worry, I promise to open the gates tomorrow morning and invite the Great Khan into the city. Seeing that Bola had agreed, Chiwen made a promise. Soon, the tiger troop talisman was in his hand, and Chiwen's anxious expression also calmed down. There was one thing that Chiwen had never mentioned to anyone. Not only was he feared by Khan Mahama because of his outstanding ability, but more importantly, his wife was once taken by Mahama because of her beauty. Mahama then snatched her away for a night. Chapter 1458. Things like this were not rare in the Mongolian upper echelons. Even a father sleeping with his son's wife had happened before. But the strange thing was that Chiwen's wife was a woman with a strong temperament. With the idea that a good woman does not serve a second husband, she hanged herself that night before leaving Chiwen's Great Khan's tent. The next day, what was delivered to Chiwen's hands was only a corpse that was still a little warm. Chiwen and his wife could be said to be deeply in love. After a night of duty, how could he not be angry when he saw such a scene when he returned home? However, he was a shrewd person. He knew that it was impossible for him to fight against Mahama with his strength. Not to mention revenge, he was afraid that he would be captured before he could even enter the Great Khan's golden tent. It was from then on that hatred was buried in his heart. It must be said that Mahama was a cautious person. After seeing that Chiwen did not make a fuss, he always felt that something was wrong. From then on, he began to guard against him. However, because Chiwen was indeed a good fighter, and there was no evidence that Chiwen wanted to harm him, he did not make a move. However, he also did not let Chiwen take control of the military. At most, he only had 1,000 soldiers. Because it was a scandal, Mahama did not tell his son the truth. He only said that Chiwen was too strong. If he took control of the military, he was afraid that something bad would happen to the Great Khan. However, no one would have thought that a cannonball would suddenly take Mahama's life. As a result, he did not have time to tell his son many things before he died. Now that Chiwen had finally taken control of the military, could he still continue to endure? Thinking of Bola's reluctant expression when he took the tiger tally, Chiwen knew that he could not wait any longer. Otherwise, he really did not know if there would be a next time. Since that was the case, he decided to take action tonight. However, before that, he needed to send out the 20,000 golden armored cavalry. As long as this army was not protecting the golden tent, No one would be an obstacle on his way forward. Of course, there was one more thing that he had to do, and that was to surrender to the Han army. Yes, Chi-Wen had made the decision to surrender to the Han army. During the day, he had witnessed the power of the five-star army's firearms and was shocked. He had seen Russia's firearms before, but their power was limited. If he were to compare them to the five-star army, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the difference was like heaven and earth. How could the Golden Horde be a match for such an army? Chi-Wen was prepared to surrender even before he obtained the Tiger Tally. However, considering that he only had 1,000 cavalrymen, even if he brought them over, they wouldn't attract too much attention. Now that he had 30,000 cavalrymen in his hands, and most importantly, Bola's safety was in his hands, this meant that he had enough capital to do what he wanted to do. After pondering for a while, Chi-Wen called for a bodyguard and whispered into his ear, "Make your preparations. Go out as soon as the sky turns dark. Find a way to find General Gray and personally hand this letter to him." "Yes," the guard replied. He carefully put the letter into his pocket, then turned around and left. This bodyguard had followed him for more than 10 years and had witnessed his glory and decline. Naturally, he knew Gray, who was originally one of the generals of the Golden Horde. Chi-Wen was very relieved to have this bodyguard take care of things. After arranging this matter, he sighed and said, "Next, we have to go to the Golden Horde camp." This sigh expressed Chi-Wen's feelings perfectly. It was said that no egg would remain intact when the nest was overturned. In order to take revenge for his own personal grudge, he had to sacrifice the entire Golden Horde. He couldn't bear to do so. However, if he didn't do so, he wouldn't be able to take revenge. Since Mahama was already dead, he might as well vent all his hatred on Bolal. Since that was the case, he had to repay his father's debt. Moreover, judging from what happened just now, the other party did not believe in him. Everything was done out of helplessness. Once he really killed his way back to New Salai City this time, he was afraid that he would be hidden very quickly. Even being killed was not impossible. From what Chi-Wen knew, Bola was even worse than Mahama. He was even more unforgiving. When he thought about how he was doing this for his own life, the guilt in his heart lessened. At this moment, Chi-Wen was thinking about whether his actions could gain the favor of the Han army. After all, he still had to live after surrendering, and he wanted to live a better life. No matter what, this could be considered a meritorious service. He just didn't know how great this service would be. Chi-Wen was worried about how great the service would be. In his opinion, even if he didn't do anything, the Golden Horde cavalry, whose morale was already low, wouldn't be a match for the Han army, whose morale was high. The only difference was that they would have more time and losses. However, when the sky turned dark, his personal guards found the tent of the Han army and asked for their identities. When they were brought to General Gray, he was extremely excited after reading the letter that Chi-Wen had personally written. He said on the spot, "If this is really the case, your general has made a great contribution to our cause. How about this? Wait for a while. I will ask for instructions from the higher-ups." Gray had reason to be excited. As a surrendered general, he also needed the support of military service, and the more the better. Gray's performance had been very good recently. He had successfully persuaded Erhihi and 6 or 7 other small tribes to bring in nearly 30,000 surrendered soldiers. This already made Yang Chendong very satisfied. However, he used to be one of the 2 generals of the Golden Horde. His power could be said to be monstrous. If he wanted to continue the glory of that time, he needed to make more military contributions. But when he was fighting alongside the new Second Army, it was easier said than done to make any great contributions. Just as Gray was thinking about what to do, Chi-Wen's letter arrived. It was really a case of someone sending a pillow when he was sleepy. Gray instructed the bodyguard who delivered the letter and hurriedly rode to the main tent a few miles away. As the leader of the Yangxie, Yang Chendong's main tent could not be too close to the Mongolian army. Even though the Mongolian army had surrendered and was transforming into the 5-star army, he would not do any experiments. He would not stay with the surrendered Mongolian cavalry. On the contrary, he was surrounded by the Black Cavalry. The Cold Vanguard 2nd Division was on the outside. Under their protection, he was very safe. Even if someone wanted to attack him, they would not be able to get close. The sky was getting darker. Yang Chendong, who had been commanding the battle for the whole day, was not tired at all. Ever since he entered the Grandmaster realm, Yang Qindong's energy had become even more vigorous. He only needed to rest for about 4 hours every day to be 100 times more energetic. At this moment, he was standing in front of the sand table. His mind was wandering. The Golden Horde had clearly prepared for this battle. They had set up a battlefield that was more than 10 miles long and 40 miles wide to the west of New Salai City. After all, if there was not enough space for hundreds of thousands of cavalry, they would not be able to display their strength. The Golden Horde had already set up the battlefield and was waiting for Yang Qindong to arrive. At that time, they would use their cavalry to tell the Han army that in such a spacious place, the so-called firearms would be laughable in the face of hundreds of thousands of cavalry. They would not be able to withstand a single blow. It had to be said that this train of thought was correct. If they were to use such a formation to deal with the Ross Duchy, it would be hard to say if they would dare to fight in such a place. However, in Yang Qindong's eyes, things were completely different. With the great canopy in hand, the world was his. With the powerful firearms that were hundreds of years ahead of this era, the open land was a paradise for cavalry. How could it not be the world of firearms? Thus, the Golden Horde, who did not understand the 5-star army, paid a heavy price. In just one day, Great Khan Mahama had died in battle. The 200,000 allied troops had all fled. A few small tribes under the Golden Horde's command had surrendered. They had lost more than 150,000 soldiers. The results of the day's battle were so glorious that it was beyond Yang Qindong's expectations. He originally thought that it would take at least a few days for a battle like this to end. However, it was the other party's ignorance that made the outcome of the battle clear. It was dark. Even though the battle at the front lines was progressing smoothly, Yang Qindong still gave the order to stop the attack. First of all, the soldiers were tired after a day of fighting. They would not be able to perform well if they did not have a good rest. Second of all, it was too dark, which made it easier for the enemy to escape. Since he had come this time, he wanted to solve this problem once and for all. Yang Qindong did not want this battle to drag on for another 3 to 5 years. His time was limited. In 3 days, they had captured more than 100,000 captives. These people needed to be settled down. Otherwise, if there was a battle at the front lines and problems at the rear, it would be a huge joke. Yang Qindong gave the order to stop the attack. This was equivalent to giving the Golden Horde a chance to breathe. However, it was only for one night. The attack would continue tomorrow morning. Given another day, most of the battle would be resolved. The success of the battle left Yang Qindong in a good mood. However, he still came to the sand table out of habit to do one last analysis. He was switching roles. If he were bowler, what would he do? No matter how he thought about it, he could only think of one possibility. He would charge back to New Salai and rely on the city walls to defend. However, Yang Qindong wasn't worried at all about this. Not to mention that he had already made preparations and arranged for people to guard the city gates, even if they could really do it. So what? With the field artillery, wouldn't sieging the city be a piece of cake? Chapter 1459. Furthermore, the strength of the Mongol cavalry lay in their mobility. They moved quickly and came and went like the wind. Once they returned to the city and started the battle to defend the city, it was equivalent to giving up their greatest advantage. Such an opponent was like a tiger without its fangs. What was there to be afraid of? Once again, after confirming that it was difficult for the other party to have any backup plans, Yang Qindong stretched lazily. Then, he said to Captain Chiovi beside him, "Get ready. We're going to patrol the barracks." Beta Persei was tired from commanding the cannons during the day. Just shouting the cannons made his voice hoarse. At this time, he had already gone to rest. Chiovi followed and served him. After hearing Yang Qindong's instructions, he quickly replied, "Yes, I'll make the arrangements now." Patrolling the barracks was one of Yang Qindong's good habits. After fighting for an entire day, the soldiers were very tired. Some of the recruits even developed psychological problems or were tired of fighting because it was their first time killing someone. At this time, it was very necessary to meet with them, encourage them, and promise them a beautiful future. After this matter was settled, these soldiers could quickly recover their mental state. Tomorrow, they would become elite soldiers and achieve even more outstanding achievements. Qiu Vi was making the arrangements when Vice Captain Ba Daojiang walked over. Sixth young master, General Gray said that he has something important to discuss with you. It was already so late. If there wasn't something important, Gray would definitely not appear here. After hearing this, Yang Qindong's expression turned solemn. Let him in. Gray lowered his head and entered the tent. When he saw Yang Qindong sitting in front of the large chair, he knelt on the ground. He was a surrendered general and had to abide by some rules. Not seeing his master represented a form of respect in his heart. Yang Qindong saw Gray's performance and praised him for knowing when to advance and retreat. All right, raise your head. You did well in today's battle. Come, have a seat. Over the years, Yang Qindong had gained a better understanding of people's hearts. He was increasingly clear about what to say and what to do. Gray was extremely excited when he heard that his performance was not bad and that he would be given a seat. He immediately kowtowed to the ground and said, Heavenly Khan, your subordinate has something important to report, so I won't be sitting down. This is a letter from General Chiwen of the Golden Horde. Please take a look. As he spoke, he raised his hands respectfully. There was a letter in his hands. Ba Daojiang hurriedly looked at Yang Qindong. After receiving his approval, he took 3 steps forward and picked up the letter. He first checked it, and after confirming that there were no problems, he extended both hands and handed it to Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong reached out and quickly scanned through the contents of the letter. Then, he asked, Who is this Chiwen? Reporting to the Heavenly Khan, Chiwen is one of Genghis Khan's descendants. However, because his ancestors are not prominent, he is not very famous. However, Chiwen is indeed of the same race as Mahama and the others. Not only that, he is also a general who is good at fighting. If not for the suspicion and suppression, he would be listed among the generals of the Golden Horde. Gray, who was kneeling on the ground, used the shortest words to describe Chiwen's situation. He had heard a legend about the death of Mahama and Chiwen's wife. At that time, he was serving under Mahama's Golden Horde and was the general leading the team. It was because of this relationship that he had heard some of the secrets. The circle of nobles is really messy. This was Yang Qindong's first reaction after hearing the story. However, he quickly returned to normal and asked, If that's the case, Chiwen has a grudge with Mahama and his son? Yes, this matter started more than 10 years ago. It couldn't have been planned in advance, Gray explained. He wanted to use this opportunity to explain that no one would plan for a matter more than 10 years in advance. Furthermore, at that time, no one would have thought that the powerful Golden Horde would one day be destroyed by the Han army. Yang Qindong naturally understood this and nodded. That's right. So, you believe in Chiwen? Yes, your subordinate believes in him. At this time, Gray had no other choice. Since he came to deliver the letter, it proved that he believed in Chiwen first. Otherwise, why would he ask to see Chiwen now? Yes, since that's the case, I'll leave this matter to you. If you need anyone to cooperate with you, feel free to ask. How about this, Ba Daojiang? You will follow Gray's left and right generals. If you need any help, you can coordinate. Yang Qindong thought for a moment and gave his answer. In his opinion, it was naturally best if Chiwen could sincerely surrender. It would save a lot of effort and casualties. If Chiwen wanted to make any moves, it wouldn't matter. At most, they would launch an attack earlier. At the very least, arranging Ba Daojiang by Gray's side was naturally to guard against Chiwen. The way to use people was to use people with suspicion, and use people with suspicion. One definitely couldn't completely trust anyone, and shouldn't casually suspect others without evidence. If this matter is done well, General Gray will have made a great contribution. Even Chiwen will have made a great contribution. This Khan can consider letting you lead an army alone in the future. If you want a horse to run, you want it to eat grass. Yang Qindong was never stingy when it came to delegating power. However, the prerequisite was that Gray had won his trust and had made enough contributions. Upon hearing that he still had the opportunity to lead an army, the kneeling Gray's face instantly turned red. Immediately, he started to kowtow to the ground. Thank you for your trust, Heavenly Khan. Please watch my actions. Gray's face turned red. As a surrendered general, it would be a good ending if he didn't get punished. Even better, it would be extremely fortunate if he could become a rich man and live until he died. As for being trusted by a new lord and being given military power, it wasn't that this had never happened before. It was just that it was extremely rare. Gray was still in his prime and wasn't even 40 years old. If he retired now, it would be somewhat regretful. This was especially so after seeing the power of the 5-star Army's firearms. He wanted to make use of this opportunity to make more contributions. This way, he would be able to obtain more when he retired. It could be said that a second spring had already sprouted in his heart. If he could lead an army alone, it would be better for him to complete his dreams and plans. Yang Qindong's words had also scratched Gray's itch. This could be seen from how his forehead quickly turned red as he knelt down and kowtowed to the ground devoutly. "All right, you don't have to kneel here. This Khan wants to see the results. Go and make the arrangements." Yang Qindong waved his hand. He didn't admire someone like Gray from the bottom of his heart. After all, he was a traitor. However, the Golden Horde was extremely powerful. Even if he defeated them, it would be extremely difficult to be used by them. However, with someone like Gray, things would be different. They were originally the generals of the Mongolian cavalry. If they could fully cooperate with him, he would be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. This was the reason why Yang Qindong promised Gray that he could lead an army. Of course, there was a prerequisite for all of this. Even if Gray was to lead an army, he had to be under his nose. Only then would he be able to take action in the shortest time and minimize the losses if things went wrong. Of course, the possibility of this happening was very low. After all, he had already betrayed his master once. If Gray did this again, no one would dare to believe him. Gray quickly stood up and bowed towards Yang Qindong's seat. Then, he walked out of the tent accompanied by Ba Daojiang. Gray was still very satisfied with this late-night visit. After getting Yang Qindong's promise, he was full of energy. As for having Ba Daojiang by his side, he wasn't worried at all. Instead, he was happy. He originally didn't have any intention of betraying Yang Qindong. Now that there was someone following him, he could see all of his efforts and report back to Yang Qindong. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Gray quickly rode back to the main camp. When he saw the personal guard sent by Chi-Wan, Gray made a promise. He said that as long as Chi-Wan performed well, not only would the safety of himself and his family in New Sarai City not be a problem, he would also be rewarded greatly. After the personal guard received the promise, he left the camp and returned to Chi-Wan's place. He reported everything that he had seen and heard. "Good, you did well. Go and receive your reward." Chi-Wan's face was filled with excitement. Just now, he had arranged for 2 golden armored cavalry to leave the main camp and head towards the west gate of New Salai. Without these people, the defense of Bowler's golden tent would be useless. He could do whatever he wanted. "Men, gather 500 Chi soldiers and follow me." Chi-Wan knew that this was a serious matter. Naturally, he would not easily trust others. Therefore, he decided not to use other soldiers. He only arranged the 10,000 cavalrymen that should be under his command to the periphery to prevent others from spying on the golden tent. The ones who went with him to capture Bola were all his family generals. Some of them had followed him for more than 10 years, so there was no problem with their reliability. In the golden tent, although it was getting late, Bowler didn't fall asleep. He just lay on the bed with his eyes closed. All in all, too many things had happened in one day. First, his father was killed, and then he succeeded the throne. Then, Shamask and Mao Lahong escaped, and the defeat of the soldiers in front of him, and now he was trapped. If he could go back in time to a day ago, Bowler would never have dared to imagine that such things would happen. Now, it had happened. It was true that life was full of ups and downs. He was now the Khan. As long as he could safely return to New Salai, once the reinforcements from the Ross Duchy arrived, it was possible to force the Han army to retreat. When that time came, he would work hard to recuperate. Once he was strong enough, he would first deal with the Churkas and Alans. Then, he would destroy the Ross Duchy. Finally, he would point his troops at the Han territory. He wanted to let these people know how terrible the consequences of angering him were. Chapter 1460. Thinking of these things, Bo La unknowingly fell asleep. After an unknown amount of time, a burst of shouting came from outside. Only then did he slowly open his eyes and see a sharp, curved blade against his neck. The person holding the blade was Chi-Wan. At this moment, he was looking at Bo-La with a smile, his eyes full of playfulness and mockery. "Clan uncle?" Seeing Chi-Wan sitting on his bed, Bo-La couldn't help but be startled. He was the Great Khan. Without his permission, how could anyone get close to him? As soon as he felt the cold sensation on his neck, he immediately woke up. "Hee, you're still calling me clan uncle. You're really kind-hearted. But do you think I'll believe you so easily? I'm afraid that once we safely return to the city, you'll kill this clan uncle of mine," Chi-Wan said with a fake smile. At the same time, his right hand exerted a bit of force, and the tip of the blade pierced his skin, causing blood to seep out. Feeling the coldness and killing intent that could go berserk at any time, Bo-La, who originally wanted to resist, immediately became well-behaved. He knew this clan uncle of his. Although he wasn't a match for 10,000 people, in terms of skills, he was far from being able to defeat him. Now that the blade was against his neck, if he made a mistake, he could injure himself. Having just become the Great Khan, Bo-La, who viewed his life as extremely important, wouldn't easily take such a risk. At this moment, he slowly raised his hands and made an expression that said he wouldn't resist or play any tricks. "Clan uncle, why are you doing this? Your nephew really believes in you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have handed over the military power to you." "Yes, you want to use me. Use my commanding ability and bravery to kill a path of blood and ensure that you enter the city. Isn't that right?" "Humph. Speaking of using people, you and your father are the same. You and your father also don't easily trust others. Otherwise, you wouldn't be unaware of the hatred between me and your father and wouldn't trust me so much. Ha ha ha. Isn't that right?" When he thought about how his beloved wife had been played to death by Maha, the expression on Chi-Wan's face became slightly ferocious. Indeed, Mahama hadn't told Bo-La about his grudge with Chi-Wan. Perhaps Bo-La also felt that he had done something wrong and had lost face. In addition, his body was fine, so he only needed to know about this matter. If he really couldn't do it, he would just kill Chi-Wan. But who would have thought that the accident would come so suddenly? This time, he had left first, leaving behind his son who didn't know the truth. He had even put Chi-Wan in an important position, so it was reasonable that he would end up like this. Even after Chi-Wan said all this, Bo-La was still confused. He still couldn't understand why this uncle of his would betray him so easily. Could it be that he had given himself away in some way that made him feel that he couldn't be trusted? However, it was useless to think about this now. Since things had reached this point, the first thing he wanted to do was to survive. Then, he would see if he could convince Chi-Wan and take the opportunity to escape. As long as he could leave, he swore that he would send a large number of troops to deal with Chi-Wan and let him know the consequences of betraying him. Even though he had an idea in his mind, Bo-La still looked very obedient on the surface. "Uncle, is there some misunderstanding? Tell me, and I will explain it to you." "No need." Chi-Wan interrupted him. "What you need to do now is to be obedient and immediately hand over all your Tiger Troop talismans. Then, you can still keep your life. Otherwise, I won't kill you. I will only cut off your legs and make you a complete cripple." Haha, the Rossi Kingdom's blind Grand Duke and the Golden Tribe's blind Great Khan. I think it will be a good story. Chi-Wan was still laughing, but there wasn't a trace of joy on Bo-La's face. On the contrary, he was afraid from the bottom of his heart. As a horse race, without legs meant that he would never be able to gallop on a warhorse. What was the difference between that and a cripple? If that was the case, it would be better for him to die. As for handing over all his Tiger Troop talismans, that was also impossible. Once he did that, it would be the same as handing over all his military power. What was the difference between that and death? Unsurprisingly, Bo-La shook his head. "The Tiger Troop talisman is the symbol of the Great Khan's reign. I will never hand it over." "Oh, is that so? If that's the case, then let's search." Chi-Wan seemed to have expected this result. His voice rose a little. Soon, 6 bodyguards walked in and began searching the golden tent. The Tiger Troop talisman was an extremely important item. How could it be found so easily? No matter how hard they searched, they couldn't find a trace of it. Chi-Wen's expression was somewhat ugly. He looked at Bo-La, who looked like he couldn't hit him. He could only hatefully say, "If that's the case, then cut off his legs." The turn of events was so fast that Bo-La was caught off guard. Seeing the two bodyguards walk over with knives, Bo-La's expression was no longer calm. He cried out in alarm, "No, no, I'll give you the Tiger Troop talisman." Compared to losing his legs immediately, Bo-La had to do his best. So he chose to back down. Chi-Wen finally turned around and said, "Very good. As long as you cooperate, you will be fine. Now tell me where the Tiger Troop talisman is." "In the Great Khan's residence in the city," Bo-La said with a pale face. "The Great Khan's residence? Are you messing with me?" Chi-Wen's face was filled with disbelief when he heard this answer. How could I lie at a time like this? Father died too suddenly. Many of the Tiger Troop talismans haven't been handed over to me yet. Bo-La's face was ashen as he spoke. He was telling the truth. After all, this wasn't a normal handover. Everything was filled with too many accidents. Chi-Wen carefully looked at Bo-La and chose to believe him. Since that was the case, he didn't stay any longer. Instead, he looked at the 6 bodyguards in the tent and said, "Watch him. If he dares to shout or move, kill him. There's no need to be lenient." With that, Chi-Wen walked out of the tent. His brows were tightly furrowed. He knew that things weren't going as smoothly as he had planned. Without the Tiger Troop talisman, he could only visit them one by one. He only hoped that he would be able to make it in time for daybreak. Chi-Wen began to wander around the various camps, choosing a few familiar people of high status to talk to. Since he didn't have the Tiger Troop talisman, he could only talk to them one by one. Holding the jade pendant he had taken from Bo-La, he began to frequently enter the various camps. Chi-Wen didn't choose to rest for the entire night. Instead, he went to 7 main tents and met with 8 generals. What made him happy was that when he told them the purpose of his visit and showed them the jade pendant that Bo-La always carried with him, everything went smoothly. Other than one of the generals who said that he would not give up resistance without the Great Khan's tiger seal, the other 6 generals all said that they would wait until tomorrow morning to make a decision. If the Great Khan really made the decision to surrender to the Han army, they would not oppose it and would even support it. After all, the Han army had given them too much pressure in the battle during the day, so much so that they felt powerless. It was better to just surrender. At least they could keep their lives. This was also because the Mongol army was afraid of the 5-star army. The cannons that seemed to be everywhere, the explosions that could land by their ears at any moment, and the endless fireballs that rushed forward made the Mongol cavalry unable to see any hope of victory. However, due to the strict hierarchy, without the Great Khan giving the order to retreat, no one dared to leave. Sometimes, even if they knew that they would die, they could only go forward. Now, with Chi-Wen's explanation, everyone had a way out. Although they had the Great Khan's tiger talisman in their hands, the reason they gave was very normal. Mahama Great Khan had suddenly died, and the tiger talisman was still in the city, so they did not have time to take it out. Furthermore, Chi-Wen had said that he was following the orders of the new Great Khan, Bo-La speaking of which, he was the uncle of the new Great Khan. Could his words not be trusted? Of course, the main reason why everyone believed him was because they were willing to believe him. As long as they were willing, there would be no doubts. Even if there were doubts, they would be ignored. This made Chi-Wen's action of surrendering extremely easy. It was so smooth that it exceeded his expectations. When the sun had just risen, his army of 150,000 had basically chosen to give up on resisting. When the sun rose, Chi-Wen finally met with General Gray. After Chi-Wen explained the situation, Gray was extremely happy. "Good, General Chi-Wen. You have done a great service this time. I will definitely recommend you to the Great Khan. Now, let's discuss how to deal with the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry." Anyone could surrender, but without orders, the gold-armored cavalry would not easily surrender. Their status was equivalent to the Black Knights and Dragon Guards of the Yang faction. They enjoyed the best treatment and were also the personal guards of the Great Khan. Because they were usually treated well, they were all very strong and their fighting strength could not be underestimated. When it came to dealing with the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry, Chi-Wen's face was filled with helplessness. It was not a problem for him to persuade others. but it was too difficult to persuade the gold-armored cavalry to put down their weapons. It could even be said that it was an impossible task. Seeing the difficult expression on Chi Win's face, Gray chuckled. Since we can't persuade them to surrender, we'll leave it to the Great Khan. We'll do it like this later. Gray had received a message from Yang Chendong early in the morning. The matter of the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry would be handed to him personally. If there was a cavalry that Yang Chendong valued the most in the entire Golden Horde, it would be the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry. Chapter 1461. The strong were always respected. Yang Chendong was no exception. He was also curious about the famed golden-armored cavalry. If they were really as powerful as the legend said, he would try to convince them to submit to him. With such a strong army, it would be a good thing for his strength. While everyone was scheming against the golden-armored cavalry, the 20,000 golden-armored cavalry were still foolishly waiting in front of New Sarai. According to their previous agreement, they had to find a way to open the city gates at night, opening a door for the Khan to retreat. And this matter was handed over to General Chi Wan. However, the night passed just like that, and he did not see anyone come to give him orders. This made General Wu Shugu very puzzled. When the sky brightened and he finally saw his surroundings, he could not help but turn pale with fright. Around the golden-armored cavalry, there were soldiers holding Han army banners. They were surrounded. Wu Shugu's face instantly became gloomy and terrifying. At this time, he finally understood that he had been betrayed by Chi Wan. When he thought about how Khan Bola would be without his protection, he could not help but feel anxious. Everyone gather and prepare to charge. Wu Shugu was worthy of being a golden-armored general. He quickly made the decision to charge out and meet up with the Khan. For this, even if they had to pay a heavy price, they had to do it. This was the mission of the golden-armored cavalry. After the order was given, the 20,000 golden-armored cavalry quickly gathered in formation, ready to charge at any time. At this time, the five-star army that surrounded them also changed. The soldiers of the 2nd Division of the Cold Vanguard rushed over, and so did the Black Cavalry. Even Yang Chendong personally rushed over. When he saw that the golden-armored cavalry that was surrounded in the middle had already begun to form up, and there was no sign of panic on their faces, he could not help but exclaim, "They're really elites." True elites would naturally be able to remain calm in the face of danger and not panic in the face of danger. Many times, even when they were left with only 10% of their men, they could still charge and inflict heavy damage to their opponents. This was true elites. For example, the Black Cavalry could do this. In comparison, the 20,000 golden-armored cavalrymen in front of him were not bad either. Yang Chendong had to admit that he only had 2,000 Black Cavalry with him, while the Golden Horde had 20,000 elite soldiers. This was the strength of the foundation. It was not something that could be achieved through hard work. "Young master, let me test their capabilities." Beta Persei had already put on a black armor and walked in front of Yang Chendong. It was as if he had a pair of dog noses. Once there was a battle, he would always be the first to appear and think of a way to participate in the battle. As a matter of fact, when he saw the powerful golden-armored cavalry, he left the artillery position and rushed over. Yang Chendong was just about to test the strength of these golden-armored cavalry when Beta Persei rushed over. Thinking about how this person had followed him for so many years, there was nothing to say about his bravery. Coupled with the protection of his black armor, ordinary people would not be able to hurt him. He nodded and said, "I'll give you 200 black cavalry. Remember to be careful. If you can't do it, retreat." Yes, Yang Chendong agreed. Beta Persei was naturally very excited. He immediately nodded in agreement. Soon after, he gathered 200 Black Cavalry Dragon Guards and leaped forward, heading towards the golden-armored cavalry that was surrounded. Beta Persei's voice was not much worse than a loudspeaker. When he was 300 meters away from the golden-armored cavalry, he began to shout loudly. The general idea was that he had long heard of the golden-armored cavalry's prowess, but he believed that the rumors were false. This time, he brought 200 Black Cavalry to experience it. This was the so-called challenge. If it was under normal circumstances, the golden-armored cavalry would naturally ignore it. But now, they were already surrounded and had no other choice. Seeing that the enemy had sent out 200 cavalrymen, Wu Shugu hesitated for a moment, then also ordered 200 cavalrymen to go forward. Wu Shugu naturally had his own plans. He had already thought it through. Once the 200 cavalrymen gained the upper hand and defeated the Han army, he would take advantage of the momentum to charge forward. As for whether the golden armored cavalry could win, Wu Shugu was not worried. At the very least, ever since he became a golden armored general, he had never met any cavalrymen who were a match for him in a one-on-one situation. The other party accepted the challenge, and Beta Persei laughed heartily. Good, since you've agreed to my request, if you want to surrender when you're no match for me, I'll promise to spare your lives. Ha ha ha. Beta Persei's bold laughter rang in the ears of the golden armored cavalry and caused their eyes to spit fire. Since he dared to look down on the golden armored cavalry, they would use facts to speak for themselves and teach this arrogant Han general a lesson. The black cavalry also looked at the 200 golden armored cavalry with angry gazes. The black cavalry had always been synonymous with the strongest cavalry. Even the current number 1 cavalry army in the world had to admit this point. But now, there was actually a cavalry that dared to call themselves the king of cavalry. How could they accept this? The strong were all proud, and no one wanted to admit that they were inferior to others. So at this moment, they were also holding back their strength and wanted to perform well. Everyone, listen up. When you attack later, don't hold back. These opponents are not simple. It's time to show the might of the black cavalry. Come, let's use the 3-3 formation and the arrow formation. Attack. Although Beta Persei laughed arrogantly, he was still very cautious. Since the golden armored cavalry was praised by many people, they must not be ordinary people. Even so, he certainly would not be careless. Beta Persei led the 200 black cavalry to attack first. 15 people formed an arrow formation, and each formation was divided into 5 groups. They could fight in groups or one-on-one. This was the most common way of fighting for the black cavalry. Attack. A centurion of the golden armored cavalry also shouted and led the 200 cavalry to launch a counterattack. Unlike the black cavalry, they were in groups of 50 and came in a square formation. Cavalry was different from infantry. Infantry could use their feet to control their position at will. Naturally, it was a simple matter to arrange them into a square formation. But cavalry was different. They relied on their war horses. It was easier to form a square formation when moving, but to be able to maintain such a formation when charging at high speed was already not a simple matter. Not bad. Yang Qindong, who was standing in the distance, saw all of this and could not help but nod in satisfaction. Then he stared at the battlefield, not wanting to miss a single detail. He wanted to learn from the strengths of the golden armored cavalry and see what he could learn from them. One of them took the form of a sharp arrow formation, while the other took the form of an overlapping square formation. The distance between the two sides was only 300 meters. In less than 10 breaths, they collided. The cavalry's speed advantage was not fully displayed. The reason why cavalry was known as the kings of the land before firearms were popular was because of their speed. Many times, they could use their high speed to display 10 times their strength. Often in high speed, a casual swing of their swords could quickly cut off the head of an infantry. But once the cavalry lost their speed advantage, their strength would be greatly reduced. Just like now, both sides could not display their speed. The moment they collided, they had to rely on their own brute force to suppress the opponent. To be able to become a golden armored cavalry, they were usually treated well. In other words, they ate well. Compared to the sallow and emaciated bodies of the ordinary cavalry, they were all sturdy and muscular. Naturally, their strength was not weak either. So when they could not increase their speed and had to compete in strength, their eyes revealed a mocking expression. It was as if they were saying that they would definitely win if they competed in strength. But as the saying goes, there is always someone better. To be able to become a member of the Black Cavalry, not only did their loyalty have to be very reliable, their own strength was also quite good. For example, before entering this group, there was a special test for strength. A trial stone that weighed 60 pounds. Only those who could lift it with one arm were considered qualified. Their strength was not small to begin with. After becoming a member of the Black Knight Dragon Guards, Not only did they eat good food, but they also ate very nutritious food, which allowed them to fully display their potential. In comparison, they were more than one level higher than the golden armored cavalry in terms of foundation. So when it came to competing in strength, Beta Persei and the others' eyes lit up. Dang dang, ding ding, quang quang. When the collision began, both sides swung their swords confidently, hoping that the moment the other party's sword left their hands would appear. But unfortunately, this scene did not happen. What happened was that about 40 cavalrymen fell from their horses. Both sides were elites, so naturally, they would not easily let go of their weapons. So even if their strength was inferior, they did not throw their weapons away. Instead, they were brought to their horses by the tremendous force. As the saying goes, if the sword exists, the people exist. If the sword dies, the people die. Of course, the more than 40 people who fell from their horses were all golden armored cavalry, without exception. From this point of view, in terms of strength, the black cavalry was already superior. Hiss! When the centurion of the golden armored cavalry saw that the people who fell from their horses were his own soldiers, he could not help but gasp. No one knew better than him how powerful his soldiers were. But even so, they were still no match for these Han army's black cavalry. What kind of strength does the other party have? In the first round, the black cavalry won. After the two sides crossed each other, no one made a move. Instead, they looked at each other, as if taking the opportunity to recharge their strength. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the golden armored cavalry who fell from their horses also quickly jumped back on their horses. Although some people still felt their arms trembling, it was obviously not easy for the strong to admit defeat so easily. Chapter 1462. The defeated golden armored cavalry mounted their horses again. Beta Persei did not stop them when he saw this. What he wanted to do was to completely trample the other party under his feet. He wanted to convince them wholeheartedly. Since he could knock the other party off their horses once, he could do it a second time and a third time. After about half a cup of tea's time, both sides launched a second charge at the same time. After the previous failure, the golden armored cavalry changed their attack method this time. Their cavalry phalanx also began to work. They actually charged at dozens of black cavalry with overlapping attacks. They gave up the opportunity to attack the other black cavalry. They only chose to fight behind some people with their swords, maintaining the power of the phalanx. Often, after the black cavalry fought with one person, before they were ready, the second person would come up and fight to the death. In this way, it was equivalent to one black cavalry continuously challenging more than 3 golden armored cavalry. In this way, their strength would inevitably be somewhat lacking. After fighting for a while, there were 4 black cavalry soldiers who fell off their horses with their swords. Looking at the golden armored cavalry, although 3 of them fell off their horses, it was obviously a reversal of the situation compared to the first round. The 4 black cavalry soldiers who fell off their horses had each fought with at least 5 enemy riders. Otherwise, they would not be so weak. After seeing the two sides pass each other, the 3 golden armored cavalry who fell off their horses got back on their horses again. The 4 black cavalry soldiers also wanted to follow suit. But they were stopped by Beta Persei. You all retreat first. Go back and rest well. Beta Persei gave the 4 of them a comforting look. This was not because their skills were inferior, but because the golden armored cavalry had violated the rules of the battlefield. These 4 people just happened to be unlucky. Even if it was someone else in their position, they would not be able to withstand it. The black cavalry's military rules were quite strict. Since Beta Persei said so, the 4 of them had to obey even if they were somewhat dissatisfied. Immediately, he cupped his fists and left the battlefield. Seeing the 4 of them rush back, Yang Chendong said to Captain Chiovi, "Go and comfort them. This battle wasn't their fault." Yes, Chiovi was touched and nodded. Although he could see that these 4 warriors were not weaker than others, they were just unlucky to have been targeted. However, a defeat was a defeat. If he was punished for this, there was nothing he could say. However, now that Yang Chendong had asked him to comfort them, it was obvious that he did not blame the 4 of them. Not only were they not reprimanded after losing the battle, but they were also personally comforted by the 6th young master. Obviously, these 4 people would be fine. As the captain, Chauvi was touched and happy to see Yang Chandong care for the soldiers so much. The 4 dismounted black cavalry soldiers were sent back. When the centurion of the golden armored cavalry saw this, his expression was a little unnatural. It was no wonder. After his soldiers fell off their horses, they could get back on their horses and fight again. However, the opponents took the initiative to retreat after falling off their horses. No matter how he looked at it, they were at a disadvantage. In fact, the centurion of the golden armored cavalry misunderstood. The reason why Beta Persei let the 4 of them rest was because they were all injured. They would not be able to do much if they continued fighting. Since that was the case, it was better to be magnanimous this time. Not only could he ensure their safety, but he could also show his righteousness. It was the best of both worlds. Come, let's fight again. Beta Persei saw that half a cup of tea's time had passed and shouted without holding back. He had no intention of changing his strategy. This development was due to his confidence in the celestial sword in his hand. He firmly believed that if they continued to fight like this, the other party's scimitar would break sooner or later. Then, it would be time for them to win. True combat strength did not only refer to a person's bravery, courage, and fear of death. It was also one of the criteria for measuring the quality of one's luck and equipment. It was precisely because of this confidence that Beta Persei dared to continue fighting like this. The Black Cavalry had no intention of changing their strategy and continued to be tired out by the overlapping tactics of the Golden Armored Cavalry. After 3 consecutive rounds, another 16 Black Cavalry fell off their horses and withdrew from the battle. As a result, the Golden Armored Cavalry's strength increased by 20 people. No matter how one looked at it, they seemed to have the upper hand. The centurion who led the team this time had a confident smile on his face. Even Wu Shugu, who was at the back of the team, was laughing loudly as if he had already won. He was just waiting for the results of the battle to expand so that he could find an opportunity to break through. Ha ha ha. Young heir, who had once again pulled his horse back, laughed heartily. During the battle, he had carefully observed his opponent's scimitar. There were already cracks on it. As expected of a golden armored cavalry, the quality of the scimitar was very good. If it were an ordinary cavalry, it would have already been broken into 2 pieces. Fight one more time. An opportunity will appear. Everyone, get ready. Beta Persei whispered in a voice that only the people around him could hear. Then the soldiers passed the order to each other. Everyone who received the order had a confident expression on their faces at this moment. Charge! After the centurion of the Golden Armored Cavalry shouted, he took the initiative to attack. Charge! Try not to kill. Beta Persei's shout came immediately. He was also the first person to rush out on his horse. Compared to the previous few times, the morale of the Black Cavalry was much higher this time. They also knew that it was time to reap the fruits of their labor, so they used a little more force when they attacked. The Golden Armored Cavalry did not know the power of the Celestial Sword. In fact, they did not have the opportunity to fight with the 5-star army in close combat. They still arranged themselves in a square formation like the previous 2 times, wanting to use overlapping sword techniques to knock down a few people from the 5-star army. Facts also proved that good luck would not always cover one side. When the 2 sides fought again, after the saber and scimitar collided, a scene that the Golden Armored Cavalry could not imagine happened. During the collision, the body of the scimitar broke into 2 halves. Half of the sword that was originally more than 3 feet long was now cut off, leaving only the body of the sword that was still in the hands of the Golden Armored Cavalry. The sudden scene caught the Golden Armored Cavalrymen off guard. Under the overlapping technique, their scimitars were cut in half one after another. Without their scimitars, they screamed in agony as they faced the oncoming Black Cavalry Dragon Guards. Although Beta Persei said to try not to kill, and the Black Cavalry did indeed hold back, under the great force and the sharpness of the Celestial Sword, the scimitars still fell on the bodies of the Golden Armored Cavalry. However, the scimitars were not in critical positions. In the end, they only injured the Golden Armored Cavalry but did not kill them. One by one, the Golden Armored Cavalry fell from their horses. Even the centurion was slashed by Beta Persei under his ribs, and a half-foot-long wound appeared. It was so painful that he could no longer hold the reins of his horse and fell to the ground. Capture them all. At least 3/4 of the 200 golden armored cavalry who were showing off just now had their weapons cut off and fell to the ground, becoming captives of the black cavalry. The remaining less than 50 people turned and fled. At this moment, the general of the golden armored cavalry, Wu Shugu, was about to lead the army and charge over to save the captured soldiers. In his eyes, every golden armored cavalry was a precious treasure that could not fall into the hands of the enemy. Fire! Xiaofeng, the commander of the 2nd Division of the Cold Front, had been watching from the side. He had just received instructions from Yang Chendong to fire at any time if something went wrong. Now that he saw the golden armored cavalry disregarding the rules, he could not help but sneer. Then, a company of Cold Front soldiers pulled the trigger and bullets fell at the feet of the golden armored cavalry who were about to charge over, forcing them to stay still. They're just a so-so. They're too weak compared to the black cavalry. Even if they were to compete with the 1st Cavalry Division, if they had the same number of people, they would still lose without a doubt. Beta Persei had already retreated to the center of the army and came to Yang Chendong to express his thoughts. Okay. Yang Chendong was waiting for the result of this evaluation. Since the other party's strength was mediocre, they could not be allowed to live. Wu Shugu watched as more than 100 of his brothers were captured by the Han army. Naturally, his face was filled with anxiety. He looked at the divine weapons in the hands of the black cavalry with envy and resentment. At this moment, how could he not know that the reason why the enemy could win was because of the weapons? If the golden armored cavalry also had such weapons in their hands, would they still be afraid of anyone? Not only Wu Shugu, many of the golden armored cavalry also thought of the key point. They were all indignant and unwilling to admit defeat, thinking that this was the result of the Han army's tricks. However, he had forgotten that the black cavalry dragon guards had only revealed their powerful side. Both sides had yet to truly clash, and many of the cavalry's skills had yet to be revealed. If they were to truly clash, with the black cavalry dragon guards' armor, the golden armored cavalry would not be able to injure them at all. How could they possibly win? The sound of gunfire stopped the golden armored cavalry's charge. At this moment, Yang Chendong's eyes revealed a trace of impatience. The golden armored cavalry was not as strong as he had imagined. At least, they did not show much strength in the battle just now. Perhaps this was because the Golden Horde had not had an opponent for too long. Since the golden armored cavalry wasn't that powerful, there was no need to spend so much effort to recruit them. Yang Chendong's initial expectations for these golden armored cavalry that were only slightly stronger than ordinary cavalry had now turned into disappointment. They could not even detect the changes in their weapons. Just from this point alone, their observational skills and vigilance were too weak. They could not be called elites. Without a strong desire to conquer, Yang Chendong naturally would not be courteous to the golden armored cavalry. He nodded to the 2nd Division commander Xiaofeng beside him. Then, the soldiers of the Cold Front began to move on a large scale, quickly forming a square formation and surrounding the golden armored cavalry. At this moment, a simple megaphone was placed in front of Yang Chendong. Chapter 1463. The soldiers of the Cold Front started to move, which attracted the curiosity of the surrounding generals. For example, Gray, Chi-Wan, Barry, Yuchuo, Erqi, and the other Mongol generals who had surrendered to the Mongol Empire looked at this scene in confusion. Just a moment ago, the Heavenly Khan had clearly shown the intention of recruiting them. Now, he was about to attack. What exactly was going on? Yang Chendong noticed the reactions of the Mongol generals and sneered in his heart. What was he going to do? Of course, he was going to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. No, he was going to kill the monkey to warn the chicken. However, there were times when showing kindness was unable to convince the masses. Only by showing kindness and mercy could he achieve good results. Previously, he had been recruiting talents. In fact, it was inevitable that there would be a mix of good and bad people. There would also be some who had other thoughts in their hearts. However, this did not matter. The current Yang Chendong did not pay attention to these small details. His eyes were more focused on the overall situation. As long as these Mongol cavalry who had surrendered were willing to be used by him, So what if they had their own plans? As long as he was strong enough, these people would not dare to play any tricks. How should he display his strength? Killing the golden armored cavalry was the best warning. Standing in front of the loudspeaker, Yang Qindong's voice rang out in front of everyone. You have been surrounded. I will give you 10 breaths of time to choose whether to surrender or resist. If no one surrenders after 10 breaths, I will kill a row of people. His voice was firm and powerful. After Yang Qindong finished speaking, everyone's gazes landed on the surrounded golden armored cavalry. Gray, Chi-Wan, and the other generals were shocked by Yang Qindong's decision. At the very least, if it was them, they would definitely not have the courage to kill elites like the golden armored cavalry. After all, elite cavalry represented a kind of status. In front of the Mongol cavalry, who did not pay attention to economy and relied mostly on robbing, whoever had a strong army would have the strongest strength. It was equivalent to having everything. On the other hand, Yang Qindong should know this principle. He had even recruited the ordinary Mongol cavalry. How could he leave the golden armored cavalry alone? Thinking about it, he was probably just shouting to scare the other party. 10 breaths of time quickly passed. Everyone believed that the Han army would not easily start a massacre. Even Wu Shugu thought so. When the time was up, Yang Qindong lightly tapped his forehead. Division Commander Xiao Feng, who had been paying attention to him, immediately ordered, "Open fire." As his voice fell, the sound of gunfire continued to ring out. After a series of popping sounds, the outermost cavalry of the golden armored cavalry, 400 steps away, fell down. The blood was dazzling to the eye, and the smell was pungent to the nose. All of this indicated to everyone that all of this was really happening. The gunshots frightened all the Mongolian generals. They didn't expect the Khan to be so decisive. He didn't even hesitate to open fire. Yang Qindong snorted coldly in his heart when he saw everyone's expressions. He then said, "The 10 breaths countdown starts now. Do you still want to kill?" When the Mongolian generals heard this, their expressions changed. This time, no one thought that Yang Qindong was joking. Their expressions became serious. The Han army's actions had exceeded their expectations and changed their understanding. The Mongolian generals who thought that everything was in their hands began to panic. No matter what, when things didn't go according to your plan, anyone would feel a sense of trepidation. Furthermore, this involved their future and even their lives. They thought that the Han army needed them. This way, they would have something to rely on and could even bargain. However, the shooting of the golden armored cavalry clearly told them that the Han army did not care much about the Mongolian cavalry and did not need them. Otherwise, why would they kill them so easily? This was the golden armored cavalry, the most elite cavalry of the Golden Horde. They were the strongest fighting force in the Golden Horde. Normally, Mahama would feel heartache when he lost dozens of men. However, the volley of shots just now was enough to take the lives of over 300 golden armored cavalry. This result shocked the Mongolian generals who had surrendered. The Mongolian generals who had been waiting for the best price all retracted their arrogance and began to think about what to do next to protect their lives and wealth. The 10 breaths are up. Kill. After Yang Qindong nodded lightly again, Commander Xiao Feng's voice rang out once again. It was as if the gates of hell had been opened. This time around, the gunshots were even more intense, and the number of golden armored cavalrymen killed had reached about 500. More and more people died. When the Mongol generals saw the death of the Han army, they were all shocked. This was exactly what Yang Qindong wanted. He did not choose to kill all 20,000 of them at once. It was not that he did not have the ability, but he needed to intimidate them. Now, it seemed that killing them in batches was better than killing them all at once. The effect of killing the monkey to warn the chicken could be achieved. In the golden armored cavalry formation, the expressions of the soldiers had all changed. Just think of how arrogant they usually were. Often, when there was a mission to complete, they didn't need to do anything. They just needed to stand there, and their opponents would be afraid. Then, they would be free to do whatever they wanted. But this time, when facing the Han army, not only were they not afraid, but they also did not put him in their eyes. They had become prey for others to take away at will. "General, what should we do?" A few Kiliarchs came to Wu Shugu's side and asked anxiously. "Wait a little longer. I don't believe that they will really ignore us. Can't they just kill us all? Wu Shugu said stubbornly. His eyesight was not bad, and he had already seen Gray, Chi-Wan, and the others. Looking at where they were standing, he knew that they had surrendered to the Han army. Since they could be accepted by the Han army, why couldn't they accept the 20,000 golden armored cavalry? He did not surrender not because he was still loyal to the Khan, but because he wanted to wait for the best price. The golden armored cavalry had been established for over 100 years. They had served over a dozen Khans, and they had changed batches after batches. Until now, their loyalty was not as good as before. Furthermore, Mahama had just died, and they had not interacted much with the new Khan, Bola. They had not received any favors from him, so there was no need to talk about loyalty. At this moment, they did not believe that they would all die for Bola. It was also because of this that Wu Shugu did not give the order to break out. It was not that he did not want freedom, but he was afraid of the might of the Han army's firearms. He did not break out just now, and he did not have the courage to do so now. What they needed to do now was to fight for better treatment. Originally, after fighting with the Han army, they should have been able to display their strength and attract the other party's attention. This would naturally be beneficial for the negotiations. However, who would have thought that they would lose so easily? Now, they had lost, and the other party did not seem to see their use. They had started a massacre, and with just 2 gunshots, over 800 golden armored cavalry had died on their horses. If this continued, how long could these 20,000 people last? If they could not hold on, would they have to take the initiative to surrender? Surrendering was already a shameful thing. If they took the initiative to surrender, they would gain nothing. Even if they barely managed to survive, they would be looked down upon. They were the strongest elite cavalry of the Golden Horde. They were the golden armored cavalry. While Wu Shugu was still thinking about something, another 10 breaths of time was up. Another round of gunshots rang out, and around 400 corpses were left behind. Back, let me in. Finally, a golden armored cavalry could not take it anymore. The feeling of stepping on the line between life and death made their expressions change. They wanted to retreat to the center of the cavalry formation. At least they would not feel the sensation of death immediately. What are you squeezing for? Don't push. Fuck, if you squeeze again, I'll beat you up. How could the golden armored cavalry in the center of the formation give up their space? That was equivalent to putting themselves in danger. Of course, he would not agree to it since he did not want his friends to die. Now, before the cold spear warriors could fire, the golden armored cavalry's formation was in chaos. In order to get closer to the center so that they wouldn't become the next target of the muskets, some people couldn't help but attack their comrades. Since they were all going to die, they might as well fight it out. Perhaps they could even squeeze into a better position and live a little longer. The formation was in chaos. Wu Shugu, who was in the center of the formation, was quickly affected. He saw the golden armored cavalry in front of him retreat. The golden armored cavalry in the back tried to stop them. There were signs of internal strife, and he could no longer sit still. Although surrendering was embarrassing, if his strength was greatly reduced, the Han army would find him a punching bag. If he could not live after surrendering, wouldn't he gain nothing? Wu Shugu made up his mind. He could not let things go on like this. Everyone, quiet down. Don't make any more noise. Wu Shugu finally stepped forward and roared. Only then did some of the golden armored cavalrymen who had drawn their swords calm down. Bang, bang, bang. Another round of gunshots rang out. Several hundred golden armored cavalry who were squeezed in the periphery were shot and fell to the ground, leaving behind a group of lonely warhorses. Don't shoot. We surrender. We surrender. Wu Shugu was both angry and anxious when he saw that the Han army was still shooting at him even though he had already stood up for them. He was angry because the Han army did not take them seriously. He was anxious because he had to make a decision quickly. Otherwise, the number of golden armored cavalry would decrease, and he would only be a general in name. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.